Good evening. Hello, you're watching the Straits Times' special coverage of GE2025. I'm Olivia Quay.
And I'm Natasha and Zachariah. 9 days of hustings, 92 out of 97 seats contested, and it all comes down to this. Polling day.
That's right. There are 211 candidates, with the PAP the only party to run in all 33 constituencies. Its largest opponent, the Workers' Party, is fighting for 26 seats in 5 GRCs and 3 SMCs.
And the Progress Singapore Party, which contested the largest number of seats of any opposition party in 2020, is fielding a scaled-back contingent of 13 candidates in 6 constituencies. And we'll be diving into these key matchups in just a bit.
I should point out some good news right at the start, Natasha. It's going to be a very short show because we'll be on from now until the last sample result comes in.
So counting of the votes will begin immediately after polls close in just under 10 minutes. And about an hour and a half after that, the Elections Department is expected to release the first sample count result.
Now, it's crucial to remember that the election result could be slightly different to the sample count. A sample count is done at the start of the counting process to get an early indication of the possible outcome for that electoral division.
Getting through the sample counts for each and every electoral division should take about an hour or so, and we'll be here for that entire process. So to help us dissect the sample count results and recap the big issues from GE2025, we're joined by 3 guests today. Dr. Rebecca Grace Tan, a political science lecturer at the National University of Singapore. Joel Lim, who hosts the Political Prude podcast and has met a couple of candidates during the election. And Nydia Ngiow, the Singapore Managing Director at think tank BowerGroupAsia. Welcome and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Rebecca, the first question goes to you. So sample counts have been made public since GE 2015, so just, 10 years ago. I mean, they've always been done, but only made public, since 2015. So how accurate have sample counts been in the past elections?
So since 2015, in 2015, the accuracy was about 0 to 5% accuracy rate, meaning that the sample count results are basically deviated between, either accurate, right, the 0%, or deviated by up to 5%. In 2020, it was 0 to 4%. So generally speaking, that means that we can be quite sure of the accuracy. Everybody can go to bed after this. Well, depending if you want to go and celebrate or whatever you're doing. But yes, so we can generally expect that if we see a difference between the parties, between the candidates of more than 4 or 5%, then generally we can be sure that the result will largely be the same. Of course, the question is the margin, that might matter as well. But overall, in terms of which constituency goes to which party, that can be, as long as the margin is not too small, we can be quite sure that it is largely representative of what will be the actual outcome later on in the night.
So can I ask, why does Singapore have these results?
Though it was made public because it was a way of, the reason given was that it's supposed to reduce speculation, where, because you're waiting quite a long time for this counting to happen, right? And in the meantime, nobody really has any answers, but everybody's kind of waiting. And there's a tendency, I think, for, especially now with social media, I think even more, for people to be speculating about, why is it taking so long? Why do we have to have a recount? How close is it? And because it's basically radio silence, right? Everybody's kind of sitting around waiting. There's a greater likelihood of speculation. And so it was just to deal with that, the fear of, what happens when people speculate and people get more and more anxious the longer you wait. So that was why it was released earlier. So we can all go to bed.
It's true. I think since the introduction of sample count, we've had a few now, the last one being, of course, the presidential elections. And I think they've all been relatively quite, accurate, right? Yeah. So I think it has really changed the way we consume, the results on the news or, through social media. A lot of us say, once the sample count comes in, okay, can go and sleep already. Whereas in the past, we used to wait till like 3, 4 a.m. until the final results come in. So it has really changed the way we consume.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you so much for that good context to know for the start of the show and throughout the show as well. I should also point out that if any actual results come in, we'll of course go straight to the returning officer. And for GE 2025, that will be Mr. Han Kok Tuan, the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore Director General.
So 5 seats are already in the bag for the PAP, with Marine Parade Brattle Heights going uncontested. And that was one of the big surprises on nomination day. And the first walkover since GE 2011.
That's right. So that's why there's a number 5 that you can see under the PAP column in our so-called rainbow bar at the bottom of your screen. We'll keep adding, of course, to those numbers as the sample votes come in.
The Marine Parade Brattle Heights PAP team comprises of Minister of State for National Development and Home Affairs Faisal Ibrahim, Speaker of Parliament Seah Kian Peng, former Macpherson MP Tin Pei Ling, and new faces Dinah Pang and Goh Pei Ming. So let's throw it back to our panelists to talk about what happened on nomination day.
Nydia, we haven't heard from you yet. Your reaction when you first found out that Marine Parade Brattle Heights will go uncontested?
I think it was a bit of a surprise, definitely, especially because the Workers' Party had, walked the ground there and had ran for in that constituency previously as well. And I think what's interesting to note is that, if I was a Marine Parade Brattle Heights resident, I might be feeling a little bit left out because if you look at the slate here, yes, there are very prominent candidates, of course, in the mix. And of course, we've seen how there is the speaker, and of course, Tin Pei Ling also did very well in the last elections, performing as one of the best ranking female candidates. But I would say that, it sticks out a little bit like a sore thumb just because there isn't an anchor minister in this particular GRC. You could say that it was a smart strategic move, perhaps, by the PAP on nomination day itself, knowing that perhaps receiving some knowledge beforehand that, there wasn't going to be any contest, and so it was therefore a bit safer to not include a anchor minister. But I would still feel a little bit left out just because every other GRC has an anchor minister at the helm. Yeah.
Speaking of feeling left out, I think a lot of the voters in that GRC are feeling very, feeling the FOMO today because everybody's posting on Instagram like, I voted. Everyone's posting their polling card. And I did see a few friends of mine who are like, a little bit FOMO today, just going about my day as a usual day because I don't get to vote. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about the reaction from other parties because some opposition parties did not react well to WP's decision not to run in Marine Parade Brattle Heights. And the PPP said the Workers' Party was abandoning voters there. Was the PPP's chief, Goh Meng Seng, warranted in his reaction? Rebecca?
It's hard to say that you're abandoning the constituency because firstly, the electoral boundaries were redrawn, right? And that was the reasoning that the Workers' Party gave, right? Was that because of the changes to electoral boundaries, the Workers' Party had to make basically a tactical decision about where they could basically maximize where they could win. And that was the decision. Now, I know later on we might talk about Tampines, but I think that also comes together, right? Is that you see on one hand Marine Parade Brattle Heights GRC being uncontested, but on the other hand you're a four-corner fight with Tampines, right? And that almost feels like, in both scenarios that there was just a lack of coordination amongst the opposition, so that basically one was the PAP getting 5 seats, and the other one, because of the lack of coordination, a possibility, right, that if the supposed sort of opposition or party vote share is now split, it increases the likelihood that the PAP will also win, and that's also a result of a lack of opposition coordination. It's the same problem or the same cause, but two quite different outcomes. And if you kind of see those two things together, then one might argue, why would opposition, why not feel not one of the Tampines teams, but why not, if you want to put all the resources into Tampines, why not have put it into Marine Parade Brattle Heights, so that there's also a contest there, rather than create less contest in some ways, because you have a walkover.
Yeah, Joe, do you want to quickly
on the social media space, I think a lot of us were very surprised. I think this is the first time we've had a walkover since 2011. And I think a lot of the opposition parties, in the lead up to nomination day, was saying that they are expecting this election to not have a walkover. So I think that, even online, I think people were quite taken by surprise. But yeah, I think I did manage to speak to NSP's Spencer Ng in one of the podcast interviews that we did. And, he said, opposition unity is a fantasy. So I did ask him, why run in Tampines where it's a four-corner fight, right? And he said, there are several factors here at play, and that they had to consider their own reasons for running as well. And we can go through that later on too.
Fabulous timing, Joelle, because this is the latest now. It's 8 p.m., which means polls have closed all across Singapore. And of course, it is now or very shortly that the counting of your votes will begin.
So we are looking out for the sample count results. And a sample count is done at the start of the counting process to get an early indication of the possible outcome for that electoral division. So if you want more content, you got to stay plugged in as the Straits Times brings GE2025 to you across multiple platforms. Do check out our live blog for all the latest developments coming out of polling night.
You can, of course, visit our interactive page as well. Very informative over there, and they'll be especially useful when the results start coming in. So around 2.6 million voters expected to have gone to the polls today, casting their ballots for the nation's next leaders.
Here's a look at what our Straits Times videographers captured today.
Well, some fabulous shots over there that our videographers managed to capture, especially the bride who made it to the polling
Such a
center.
beautiful dress.
After her
Yeah.
wedding. I know she must have been caught so much attention. Nat, how was your voting experience this morning?
It was excellent because it was like through train. I just went through,
Typical Singapore.
Yeah, I
Very
did not
smooth.
have to wait at all. It was like zoom, zoom, zoom through every, checkpoint along the way. Yeah.
In and out, 5 minutes.
Yeah. What about you?
Same here.
In and out, 5
Typical,
minutes?
yeah,
Oh,
typical.
okay.
Nydia, Joelle, how was yours?
I went first thing in the morning. It was raining, so I expected that there was going to be some wait time, but no, I just went right through and it was probably less than a minute altogether.
Less than a minute.
Yeah, it just was very smooth. Barely, no one was there. Well, there were, of course, voters, but yeah, it was very seamless.
Were you caught in the heavy downpour?
Thankfully, no. So my voting center was actually near a parking lot. So, I got out of my car and just went straight in,
Right.
sheltered all the way
Sheltered
through.
walkways, those sheltered
Walkways.
walkways.
My mind was less than a minute as well. I was
wow.
so shocked because the last time for GE 2020, there was a long queue before I could go in. And I think maybe they took a bit of feedback this time around and they, arranged it more efficiently this time.
I think
'cause
the
there
last
was
one was COVID as well,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
people
Safe
were voting during
distancing.
COVID. Yeah, I think
True,
people
it's
might
true.
forget, but that
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so this time it was so smooth. In fact, there was no one, and it was a little bit awkward. Just like walking up, and the entire
much space.
everyone there was just looking at us. I'm like, okay, yeah. So it was cool, and I think this time around I saw less people struggling with the stems. For the PE, a lot of people going online. I don't know how to chop. I'm like, guys, just chop. So it was really easy to vote, and the entire process was really smooth. So yeah, good job to the polling agents, by the way.
All right, let's talk about some hot battlegrounds in this election. And one of the most talked about GRCs this election was Punggol, which was created by carving out estates in Punggol and then merging them with Punggol West SMC. Now, ever since the new electoral boundaries came out, this was one GRC to look out for.
But the contest in Punggol was made even more exciting by the appearance of DPM Gun Kim Yong on nomination day. We all remember where we were, I think, when we were like, he's there? Scramble, scramble, scramble. Okay, so let's take a look at the 4-member PAP team over at Punggol. So DPM Gun leads their team over there. He is joined by Janil Puthucheary, Ms. Sun Chia Ling and Ms. Yo Wan Ling. And of course, they are battling a very strong WP side led by Harpreet Singh. And he's joined by Jackson Au, Alia Mata, and Alexis Deng.
So this could be anything but straightforward for Punggol voters. DPM Gun was fielded, as Ollie said, from Choa Chu Kang to Punggol and in an 11th hour move on nomination day. And back in 2020, when he was running in Choa Chu Kang, his team won 58.6% of the vote against a PSP team. So what should voters make, because of the matchup? Because as Ollie said, WP has a very strong team. They have a star catch, who was, a lot of people heard about him, Harpreet Singh there. But there's 3 cabinet ministers on the PAP side. So how do you think this will match up? Maybe Nydia, you want to take the question?
I think this is definitely the race to watch. Especially with DPM Heng Swee Keat retiring before with nomination day announcements. If the PAP loses Punggol, then it means that Lawrence Wong essentially loses both his DPMs, and I think that he'll be struggling to really play around with the makeup of his cabinet thereafter. I also think that it's very interesting to have DPM Gun parachuted in. Going back to our earlier discussion on Marine Parade, where I talked about how there was no anchor minister, one could argue that maybe an anchor minister wasn't necessary in certain GRCs, but then I would say that, with the creation of Punggol GRC, it could have been time for maybe Dr. Janil to prove his chops as well, being a senior minister of state, being able to, helm a GRC by himself could be his ticket to becoming a full minister. But I think that that's a really interesting race, definitely when there are so many cabinet ministers in the slate. Yeah.
Right. Well, much ado has been made about ministers leaving their old constituencies. DPM Gun is, of course, one of them. Moving from Choa Chu Kang, as you said, to Punggol. Manpower Minister Tan See Leng as well. Marine Parade leaving Marine Parade to take up the spots left by DPM Gun over in Choa Chu Kang. And then on the opposition side, of course, we have most notably Dr. Chee Soon Juan contesting Sembawang West SMC now. So, guys, what do you make of the argument from both sides that candidates are abandoning? That's the term that's being used, right? Abandoning their residents. Rebecca,
I think the issue really is one of whether we think how people vote. So do you vote based upon if you believe you have local constituency concerns, right? Which I think a lot of voters are concerned about, right? The everyday running of your constituency, things like that. Having somebody who knows the residents and knows their particular concerns, and knows the particular pain points and things like that, is important, right? Which is why you do have people teams walk the ground between elections, right? It's not merely whoever is the team in charge, right? So the winning team walks the ground, of course, because they're running or they're helping to run the constituency. But even the losing team often continues to walk the ground and work the ground between elections as well, so that they get a sense of, the residents know them, the residents get a sense of who they are, rather than in the very short sort of 9-day period where you have to get to know your candidates. It's very hard to obviously get that data to make an informed decision about whether somebody can represent your local interests, whether they know you and they know your particular concerns about, I think one of the things that came up was, in Punggol, there are not enough covered walkways. I think this is something that, Harpreet Singh made a point of in his rally speeches, and this was something, those who'd walked the ground apparently in Punggol knew, and he questioned, would, DPM Gan know that if he did not, had not walked the ground, right? Because there are local constituency concerns. If we think about it as choosing it based upon party and their national policies, so if that's your metric for making that decision, right? So you're looking at manifestos and you're saying, I'm choosing because I agree with X, Y, and Z parties' policies, then walking on the ground, I guess, is less important, right? This sense of betrayal, because I'm choosing based upon party line, rather than, was this person always in my constituency? But yeah, it happens regularly because the electoral boundaries shift every general election. And so it's hard to say, especially for the opposition who, are always saying they have inadequate warning to prepare. So that's Dr. Chi's argument, right? Is that his the SMC he was probably intending to contest in was basically dissolved. He had no choice, was his argument, right? So it really depends on the metric, I think, when you're voting, right? You're looking at it from a constituency point of view, meaning I, have almost kind of personal relationship, or I want to have some sort of personal relationship with my representative, or you're looking at it from a party point of view. So it depends on which voter you talk to, I think, when we talk about this kind of sense of betrayal, or like that you have to have been in that space for a extended duration before the election itself. Yeah.
I wanted to ask something about the popularity of candidates. Well, first, because I mentioned earlier that there were star catchers, and Alexis Dang, one of the candidates for WP, was a huge hit on social media. And even with Harpreet Singh and the team, a lot of people were queuing up to take pictures with them. Joel, social media guy, what do you make? And even DPM Gun, he was labeled a task force man, and people, shot off with that on social media. What do you make of, the popularity playing out on that medium?
Yeah, I think specifically for the Punggol GRC teams, I think with the Task Force Man label, it really created this whole narrative around like DPM Gun. And I think we could kind of sense that maybe the PAP was thinking that they are facing kind of tough opponents. So, once everyone started talking more and more about DPM Gun, you can also see the PAP supporters rallying around him as well. And now talking about the fact that, we could lose DPM Gun, right, in this very tough contest. But I think we also can see Sun Xueling having a very prominent social media presence because I think a lot of her posts during this period garnered quite a bit of traction online. She's very, personable, and, people relate to her. And actually, I saw a lot of people come forward to talk about their experience with her, whether it's in capacity of, the MP for the constituency or in her role as, Minister of State. So, I think her presence this election has really been boosted as well on the social media space, and certainly I would say one of the more popular candidates, not just in Punggol GRC but also within the PAP as well. And then we look at the WP side. I think we're seeing a second round of the Northeast WP candidates having a lot of attention on them. The last time, of course, being new faces, Jamus Lim as well as Raisa Khan. And then this time around, I think it would be Alexis Dang and Harpreet Singh. For Mr. Harpreet, I think in the lead up to the nomination day, he was already, touted as the star catch. And I think there was a lot of media attention on him. He was doing a lot of podcast interviews as well that was gathering a lot of momentum for him. And then I think once Alexis Dang was announced on nomination day, I think a lot of people, started taking notice to her in the way she speaks, in the way she carries herself as well. So I think it's really looking at those two, and I would say both teams are immensely popular on social media.
All right. So just a quick roundup of Punggol actually. Will this actually translate to vote share, the popularity, popular candidates? What will it mean at the polls?
I mean, for me, one thing I was looking out for this election was also whether or not, the WP would put Harpreet on the televised forum. I think the last time around, apart from the introduction of Dr. James, his performance on a televised debate actually got him a lot more attention. And this time around, it was Michael Thung that got the opportunity. So I do think that if they had put Mr. Harpreet on the televised debate, he would have gotten more attention that could perhaps translate to vote, because just simply, having more face time and air time with him. But I think we'll just have to take a look at the sample counts that come in, soon. Yeah.
All right.
So sorry, I just want to keep staying with
Of course.
Because there's so many things to ask. Yeah.
It's true.
So, in your opinion, like, what kind of vote share, depending on who wins, what kind of vote share would that tell us? What can the vote share tell us about how residents are feeling? Because as we all have mentioned several times, it's a new GRC. A lot of things are up in the air.
I think, if you look at how the votes play out through the sample count, or however the results fall, I think at the end of the day, we need to look at whether or not the messages are resonating. There's been so much talk about Gan Kim Yong, DPM Gan Kim Yong being the task force man, and towards the end of the campaign, you really see that focus there. But prior to that, I think he had been doing quite a great job with his social media in terms of rebutting some of the comments that have been said. So I think that, at the end of the day, we need to look at what are some of the messages that are resonating with the residents that would really be the best indicator, I think, of whether or not how residents are going to vote at the end of the day. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much. Okay, we'll leave Punggol right now.
We'll come back
All right, we'll leave Punggol right now, and we'll definitely get back to it when the sample count for Punggol comes in. But right now, we have latest pictures just in of ballot boxes being sealed at polling stations across Singapore. So the ballot boxes will be transported to a counting centre with a police escort.
Now, at the counting centre, a counting assistant picks up a random bundle of 100 ballot papers and counts the number of votes for each candidate or group of candidates.
Right, so you can see right now officials sealing the ballot boxes, to make sure that the votes are not tampered with, so that it is untouched basically until it gets to the counting centre, where then of course the very exciting process of the counting begins. All right, so you're just seeing pictures of the sealing of the ballot boxes, I beg your pardon. And of course, the first thing we'll look out for is the sample count. And I should mention that, the sample count, it's just a sample count. You have to wait for the election result to come in, so that to find out how the election has gone.
All right, let's get back to our chat and let's go to another very hot GRC, one that's very closely watched, and that is Tampines GRC. Now, it's set for Singapore's first four-way contest in a GRC during a general election. It is also one of 5 multi-cornered fights. The other are in Ang Mo Kio, Sembawang, Potong Pasir, and Radin Mas.
All right, this is an incredibly crowded graphic. Let's delve into it. Okay, so for the PAP, it's led by Minister Masagos Zulkifli. He's joined by Mr. Kopo Kun, Bayam King, new faces David Ngiow and Charlene Chen. And so the 3 other opposition parties contesting Tampines, the WP team led by Faisal Manap, who of course moved from the alternate A team for WP to contest Tampines. And then NSP is the team there is led by Reno Fong, and PPP led by its Sekjen Goh Ming Singh.
All right, let's chat about this very hot GRC. So, Tampines has taken in parts of the current alternate GRC while losing some areas to the new Tampines Changkat SMC. So, we're seeing a lot of opposition parties here. They couldn't agree who should step away from this multi-cornered fight. And earlier, someone mentioned about opposition unity. In the long run, what will Tampines GRC, stand for opposition unity, no matter what the result is today?
I think it depends. So the way I'm reading it is looking at how voters interpret it. So voters and what this means for the future, also the fact that we have a very crowded, in general in Singapore, we have so many opposition parties, right? We were looking at the rainbow just now, right? And what that means for smaller parties going forward. Because what happens with Tampines, we'll see if voters, for example, vote tactically. So they will vote for who they think. Firstly, obviously, if they vote for the PAP, then that's not that surprising. But when you support the opposition, out of the 3 options available, who do you vote for? And often voters, some voters will vote according to their truest preferences, right? So the most genuine preferences, they might look at the manifesto and say, I agree with this one the most. I think, and it doesn't matter whether I think this party is likely to win or not. Now, you have tactical voters that might say, I'm going to vote for the party I think is most likely going to win, i.e. so I don't waste my vote, right? Because there's no point voting for the smallest party, the least likely to win, because I'm basically wasting my vote for a party that never going to make it anyway. And this will be interesting because NSP has been the previous opposition party that's contested in previous general elections. So will it be seen as the opposition party, meaning if I'm really choosing between PAP and another party, who is the opposition party most likely to win? And voters can either go tactically and say, is it really the Workers' Party? Because a lot of the narrative surrounding Tampines is basically PAP versus Workers' Party, right? And that's the framing, ignoring, of course, the other 2 parties. Or if voters say, like we talked about, this sort of walking the ground narrative, then NSP is the most recognizable party within Tampines because they've been contesting Tampines over the past general elections. So I think it's interesting to kind of see if voters vote tactically. They might say, well, I think the Workers' Party is, most likely going to be the winner because, lots of people like the Workers' Party over and above other opposition parties, so it's the strongest opposition party, then they might shift their votes. And this might have further effects, I think, for future general elections, which I think is also important to think about, because then, it will create the impetus for sometimes candidates to switch parties because they will say, there's no point me joining a party that's less likely to win, so they technically shift to a party that's more likely to win. That's why we see candidates often switching parties, especially in the opposition, to where they're most likely to maximize their chances of winning. But also voters will change their behavior as well, right, based upon what they think is going to achieve the outcome that they want. And if it's more opposition in Parliament, then they will say, I think this party is where my vote is most meaningful. And so this will have big implications for whether we'll continue to see so many opposition parties or we'll start seeing opposition support generally coalesce around a few parties, and then this will translate into resources in terms of manpower shifting because different candidates will shift. Volunteers will also shift to where they believe, their efforts are most useful. And voters will also shift their behavior for future general elections. So we might see a change. Political scientists like talking a lot about, we'll start seeing the rise of a 2-party system because it makes sense within the way our electoral system is set up. And so this might be the start of it where we start seeing the 4-corner fight translate into, if the Workers' Party wins overwhelmingly more than the other 2, then we'll start seeing ramifications for the way parties strategize for the future and the way voters also strategize. So I think that has bigger ramifications for interpreting for future general elections on top of this individual competition as well.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point on opposition candidates switching parties and then gaining more momentum. I think we see that with Hazel Phua, who used to be with the NSP and then went on to the PSP and then became an NCMP. And then we saw that with Nicole Seah as well, who was also NSP and then went on to the WP and did a commendable job in East Coast GRC, I believe. Yeah. One thing I wanted to discuss with regards to Tampines was that I actually managed to speak to 2 of the candidates who are running in NSP, Z Fei as well as Eugene Yeo. And, I just was asking them, a lot of us who are not in the politics space, when we look at 3-way fights, we're like, why can't one of them just give way to the other one? Because I think historically, whenever there's a 3-way fight, the PAP always wins, right? So isn't it just simply the better choice for you to just make way for, the bigger party? And I think it was Mr. Z who just said, no, what does it say about us if we've been walking the ground for 30 years and someone else comes in and we say, okay, we're going to make space for you. What does it say about our values? What does it say about our party? So that actually made me think about it from a different perspective as well. I think online, we're always just saying, this party, move aside lah, that kind of thing. And I always see comments like that, right? But I guess through, those interactions with them, I got to see their point of view as well. And I understand, why they would choose to still contest against bigger parties as well. At the end of the day, it's the loyalty to the people there, the relationships they've built over the years, and lastly, visibility. You can't deny the fact that the election is the most amount of visibility you get as a party every 5 years.
Right.
I think I would also just like to chime in here just to talk about, how at the end of the day, maybe these four corner flags are also a sign of the maturing democracy that Singapore is getting with the amount of different political parties. I would say that, at the start of maybe, I think during the end of last year, we saw, the formation of the coalition of opposition parties, as well as, of course, the People's Alliance for Reform being formed around that time. And that made me feel a little bit hopeful that at least, the opposition was trying to do a little bit more coordination. But at the end of the day, when we look at the two, main coalitions that came out of the opposition parties this time around, you still see that there was still some lack of coordination. You saw PPP pulling out, and then, I think just days before nomination day or during the campaign period, RDU also pulled out of its own coalition. So it also begs the question of, whether or not the opposition can really get its act together to prevent such multi-corner fights that would only, support the incumbent. But it also leads me to think, whether or not these coalitions would be a bit more successful if Workers' Party or the PSP or SDP also actively participated and played a role that, is a bit more, I don't want to say maybe a bit more befitting of their larger status as a larger political party. I think that, one thing that struck me during this process was how Pritam Singh had said that he had never attended a coordination meeting with the opposition parties. And I feel like that was a bit of a waste because, that led to Marine Parade, Braddell Heights being uncontested and then, all these multi-corner fights. And I think that, maybe the Workers' Party, PSP have also some responsibility in being some of the bigger opposition parties to kind of lead the way and really help with hosting some of the coordination process as well, just to make sure that, these things don't happen and that, maybe as voters decide how they want to vote or as parties, shift and things like that. I think a lot of coordination could have gone into it, but it also makes it as a citizen, looking at the state of the opposition, if let's say my constituency was being contested by a smaller opposition party, it also makes me a bit wary of voting for them just because I don't know if they have the necessary resources. Whereas if it's, with Workers' Party coming in, I think a lot of the social media videos have them saying, we've heard your cries, you wanted us here, now we are here. But, I think that should be the case for more opposition parties as well.
I think it also adds on to how we think about opposition parties. So we often think of the opposition as the PAP and the opposition like two sets of two basic blocks. And we, for a long time, have thought of, the way we frame it often is, it's opposition and they exist simply to oppose the PAP. And maybe it's to talk a little bit about this idea of kind of maturing or the evolution of politics in Singapore is that opposition parties have started creating their own identity as not merely being a foil to the PAP, but each standing for something, they have their similarities, of course, but something slightly different, which is why they may not want to coordinate to begin with, right? Because they may feel ideologically it'd be too much of a compromise to say, I want to give up my potential seat, if you believe you can win that constituency, to another party that I do not ideologically align with. And that's the big thing, right, is that if parties start developing their own identities as being, these are our positive policy positions, then, we don't want to be like, but all opposition parties are the same, because if in that framework of a coalition, then it looks like, I can swap out one opposition party for the next one. And, they're just placeholders really for anti-PAP sentiment, rather than presenting a positive image for an alternative form of governance, alternative approach to governance. So I think maybe it's also that as well, and the Tampines case illustrates that, I think, being able to see each opposition party has its own identity and own set of policy positions. And for Tampines voters, they obviously now don't just read two manifestos or look up, two different slates of candidates. They have to do a lot more work if they want to kind of make that informed decision, and they have to read up much more. But I think it's useful to start thinking about opposition parties as being their own distinct actors rather than, a homogenous block of opposition. But yeah.
Fabulous points. Thank you so much. Fabulous points on Tampines as well as larger issues about, opposition unity. So we are approaching about 8:30, which means the first sample counts will be out in about an hour. 8:30. So the first sample counts will be out in about an hour or so. So 9 days of campaigning saw candidates going door to door, speaking to voters and even posing for selfies. Our video journalist Isabel Kumar spent one day with WP's Alexis Dang and another with the PAP's Fu Cexiang to find out what it's like on the campaign trail.
I'm with Alexis Dang of the Workers' Party and follow her on a day of campaigning.
I have other bags, but sometimes when I'm too lazy, I just put a Ziploc bag. My earphone. I like K-pop. I like Mando pop as well. I am an avid concert goer.
Some would say that the Workers' Party rally also looked like a concert.
Yeah, the new term for it is called Workachella. My older sister is a PAP supporter. I think they didn't really understand why I want to align myself with the opposition. Recently, she has been going for our rallies. I feel like she's one foot into the door.
Where do you guys get your blue shirts from?
Oh, this is from Sylvia.
Oh, this is her shirt, yeah.
I didn't realize that black shoes is part of the uniform. So I went home and I found a pair of black shoes that my mom owns. After just, 10-15 minutes of walking, it just fell apart.
On the topic of PPM gun, right? How surprised were you when he suddenly showed up?
We're definitely surprised it's him. We are not surprised that it will send a strong team too. He spoke to me in Mandarin, and then when he shook my hand, then he said, 很荣幸见到. Honestly, it's a true privilege and honor to be doing this. I'm feeling good about how you will turn out. And regardless of what the outcome is, we know that we have given our best shot.
We are now at Punggol 1 and we are going to say hi to some of the residents and give out some of our calling cards. So how has the campaign been so far?
Fantastic, yeah, it's been great. Everywhere we go, we get stopped by so many residents and all say the same thing. We've been waiting for you 10 over years. There was no credible opposition. I think what touches my heart the most is that I see a lot of young girls coming to me, maybe really resonated with some of my messages. I feel very strongly for education and I think it's the main driver of social mobility in today's context. I hope that I can help to look into new policies that will enable students from all sorts of family backgrounds to put their potential to the best use.
Tonight, you are going for a rally. What will you be doing to prepare yourself?
I'll probably try to get a short break and then I will go rehearse my script.
We are now at Tampines.
My role tonight will be the MC for the event.
Okay, I shall not take you away too much from your MC job.
Yeah,
We'll
okay.
See you. Now the crowd is getting really excited. Look. The WP rally just ended at Tampines. Alexis, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good, yeah. Today's turnout is fantastic again and we really feel very grateful to everyone who came over to hear what we have to say and what we have to offer as a party. I'm probably gonna go home, take a rest and then get ready for tomorrow's grassroots activities again, yeah.
Hi, good morning everyone. This is Fu Cexiang from the People's Action Party. Nice to meet you.
This is Fu Cexiang of the People's Action Party and today I'm going to follow him on a campaign trail.
We are today at Block 115 and we're going to do a couple of house visits. This is Fu Cexiang from the People's Action Party. 大家好，我是人民行动党的fu Cexiang，我现在在做家访。I hope to have your support in the elections. Thank you.
He's just shouting his name as he walks past the corridors of the blocks. I don't know how he has so much energy. Look at it.
I'm Fu Cexiang. I'm the new candidate from the PAP here.
How are you feeling at this time?
Feeling great, feeling great. My belief is that the energy of the residents is affected by your energy as well.
We are at our second block visit right now. I'm super tired. I'm just trailing behind Cexiang and just look at him. You can hear him before we can see him.
Madam Aisha. Madam Aisha, okay. Hi, Madam Aisha. Good morning. I'm so happy to see you. Good morning, everybody. This is Fu Cexiang from the People's Action. 你现在出去还是要回家？
Auntie Killer.
我係好慘我40歲嘅走寡要8個。
哦。你哋住邊度啊？
住呢度對面。
对不对啊？
It's been the most unexpected thing that has happened.
There is a lot more interest because normally I don't have people interviewing me while having lunch.
What do you think has been the toughest part?
This period I've been home much less. My children clearly miss me. So sometimes they will wake up in the middle of the night just to ask for a hug. And I'm there. And I'll wake up as well.
Any advice for young parents or new parents?
My parents were always very proud of me. My daughter had a spelling test. The word she was supposed to spell was strong. She spelled it as sotong. And my wife and I had a good laugh with her. Doesn't matter whether you are strong or you are sotong. We are still proud of you.
How did you feel when you found out that you were going to be contesting Tanjong Pagar JSC?
Tanjong Pagar Tiong Bahru is an exciting place because the key thing for me is that this is a really diverse neighborhood. I bring an energy to the community and I hope that energy rebounds.
If elected as MP, right, what is one of the issues that you want to raise?
Municipal upgrading, where do you increase accessibility? Are there playgrounds that can be refreshed?
So what do you want Singaporeans to remember you by?
I'm a big admirer of the previous Liverpool manager, Klopp. And I always remember what he said when he first joined Liverpool. He said, it is not important what people say about you when you join. It's only important what people say about you when you complete and finish.
The end of the day for me, but not the end of the day for you yet.
Not yet. We still got a couple more blocks that we hope to visit over here. But thank you so much for following my day, Isabel.
All right, polls closed about 35 minutes ago, and we're currently waiting for some sample votes. At the start of the counting process, a sample count of 100 ballot papers is done to get an early indication of the possible outcome for the electoral division.
If you're just joining us, welcome to the Straits Times coverage of polling night. I'm Natasha and Zachariah, and I'm here with my co-host Olivia Quay.
And we're joined by our three guests, Dr. Rebecca Tan from NUS, Joel Lim, host of the Political Prude podcast, and Nydia Ngiow, Singapore Managing Director at the consultancy firm BowerGroupAsia. So guys, before we launch into another chat, we have some pictures coming in of ballot boxes arriving at the counting centre at Nan Chiau High School. So the counting of the votes will begin in just a few moments. You can see there the boxes are just being laid out. These are the moments that we've been waiting for, right? The pouring of the ballots onto the table. I think they'll pour a few boxes together and then they'll start counting, and that's where we can really get the process going.
Yeah. So a counting assistant will pick up a random bundle of 100 ballot papers and counts the number of votes for each candidate or group of candidates.
And so we are waiting for those sample counts to come in. Remember, this is a sample count. The election result could be slightly different. So we have to go on to a few of the hot SMCs. We talked a lot about Punggol GRC and Tampines GRC. It's time to talk about the SMCs. First up is Jalan Kayu, one of the 6 new SMCs in GE2025. Ooh is correct. It's one of the youngest areas with Gen Zs and millennials comprising around half of the voters. So it is carved out of Ang Mo Kio GRC, with PAP's Ng Chi Ming facing off against WP's Andre Loh. That is after other opposition parties bowed out of the contest over there.
All right, so let's kick off the discussion on Jalan Kayu. So both candidates have been in the spotlight during this election season for different reasons. Mr. Ng is the Secretary General of the National Trade Union Congress, so that's NTUC, and he's also a former minister. And during this election, he faced criticism about the proposed sale of NTUC's income insurance to German insurer Allianz. And in 2020, GE2020, Mr. Ng and his team lost against AWP team in Sengkang with 47.9% of the vote. Will Jalan Kayu voters send Mr. Ng back to Parliament in spite of the NTUC Income Alliance saga? Who wants to take this? All right, maybe Joel, you want to kick us off with this?
I mean, at least on the social media space, there's a lot of attention on this Jalan Kayu SMC. I was actually quite surprised because I didn't think that it would be such a, battleground, right? But I think over the last 9 days, I think both candidates have been getting a lot of attention on social media. One for the WP's Andre Low, it was because of the leaked messages from his Telegram chat that came out. And then for Mr. Ng Chee Meng, actually, there was this post that came out 2 days ago. This user on Instagram came out and recounted a story basically about his interaction with a former minister at a MOE event. I believe that was what he said. And he was then a trainee teacher. And he basically said that the interaction was quite unpleasant. And while in that post, he did not identify the person as Mr. Ng, a lot of the comments and I think forum commenters as well were all, basically matching it to Mr. Ng. And basically, they were just saying that they were all corroborating that, they were there and they witnessed it. And whether or not this anecdote is true, that one Instagram reel has gotten a lot of traction online. The last I checked, it was over 900,000 views on Instagram. And I think a lot of the people who I've seen the post on basically just said that, that's quite damning against him. So I think both parties did, face a little bit of a setback and challenge when it comes to social media online. But if it was up to me to say, which one had a larger impact, at least in the digital space, I think it would be that, that anecdote that the Instagram user came forward to share. Yeah.
Rebecca?
I think it's also that the Workers' Party leadership as well has made the NTUC Alliance issue, blown it up as a major kind of point or illustration of the PAP's failings, what they see as the PAP's failings. And so it was not really Mr. Andre Low who really, obviously he talked about it too in his rally speech, but it ended up being, Mr. Pritam Singh and Harpreet Singh as well doing this as well, of kind of like sort of aiming their sights at Ng Chee Meng, which I thought was an interesting. And then, of course, by extension, it then extended on to DPM Gunn as well as head of MES at that time, right? So there's, I think it's sort of killing two birds with one stone was probably the Workers' Party logic, because they were contesting both against DPM Gunn as well as Ng Chee Meng. So there's one incident that kind of targets both of them, or both individuals could be blamed for the oversight when it came to the Income Alliance case. But I think it was used and it became a much bigger issue, and of course, so many people ended up wading in, right? From SM Lee, down to Lawrence Wong, and so it gained a lot more traction. I think most people were realizing would be a pain point. I think when I was thinking about all the issues that might come up, the Income Alliance was not really one of those that I was kind of expecting to come out again, partially because it had been, firstly, it was quite a convoluted affair, and I'm not sure a lot of Singaporeans were necessarily at some point, like, it certainly went over my head at certain points. I was just like, what is going on? But also, it just, it kind of died down, right? It happened, it was rescinded, they changed the law, and the sale didn't go through. So, there's kind of water under the bridge. Why continue to talk about it? And so it was not something I was expecting to come up, and it did, and it became a much bigger deal than just the single SMC becoming about Ng Chee Meng, but a broader issue of Labour MPs, questions of do they need to be in Parliament, and this whole discussion, I think, which is where it came out as well, is that do you need to be able to be an MP, be elected into Parliament in order to serve Singapore? And of course, then Pritam Singh and Harpreet Singh, latch on this and they say, you don't. Look at Ng Chee Meng, right? And this whole idea of the NTUC trampoline discussion comes up. And then it's used against Gan Ping Yong as well. Yeah.
Nydia, you want to jump in quickly?
I think, I think everyone knew that, when Ng Chee Meng lost Sengkang GRC, that, Sengkang, by virtue of him, still remaining in his position as Secretary General at NTUC, that he would still find his way back to Parliament or even back to being a minister at some point. But I think no one really expected the fight that he has had to make. I think a lot of, initially when there was, murmurings of him coming back to fight in this GE, I think that, there was a lot of assumptions that he could perhaps be parachuted into a GRC where, he would either take over as the anchor or be, at least come under, I guess, the umbrella of another minister that would help, propel him back into Parliament. But I think this time he's really he did say, in wanting to run in Jalan Kayu that he wanted to fight for it, and we can see definitely that it's a fight for sure. And it's really hard to say how this will go. I don't really. As Joel pointed out, that social media has been, they've seen setbacks on both ends, so it's really hard to predict how this race will go.
So on the setback that I guess involved Andre Loh, you don't think that the leaked Telegram chats and what they contained would affect his vote share much?
I think at least for the younger voters, most of us saw the messages and we just went. Actually, it's quite typical of how people would usually talk when they're frustrated or when they're upset. So it reflected less of perhaps say like a moral or a personality issue. And I think more people were just like, if he's willing to apologize for it, then we'll just take it for what it is. Yeah.
All right, so I want to move on from a new SMC to an old one. And this SMC was created in the 1968 general election. And of course, we're talking about Potong Pasir, which is seeing a three-way battle in GE 2025.
Yep, Potong Pasir has three newbies going head-to-head. PAP's Alex Yeo taking over the incumbent Sito Ipin, Singapore People's Party's Williamson Lee, and People's Alliance for Reform's Lim Tien.
All right, so Potong Pasir was the longtime stronghold of opposition leader Chiam See Tong, who held the seat under the Singapore Democratic Party and later the SPP. So Mr. Chiam was the MP there for 27 years before it was won by Mr. Sito in 2011. So will SPP's Mr. Lee be able to win the seat back for the party, or will it remain with the PAP? Thoughts from the panel?
Well, I wouldn't be able to predict, but at least I can share something that I got from Mr. Steve Chia, who's the leader of the SPP. He did come onto the podcast and we did have a discussion. And when he spoke of Potong Pasir, it really seemed like there was a no-brainer that they will, contest there simply because of the history of the space and the relationship that SPP has with the Potong Pasir residents. So I do think that the SPP is banking on that relationship at least. And for the PAP, I think they're trying to just at least secure that seat again this time around. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say at this moment because of the fact that it's gone back and forth. And of course, Mr. Chiam's no longer quite there to really kind of be the face now of the SPP. And so the SPP doesn't have Mr. Chiam's brand as much anymore. And it's hard to see how they haven't evolved the same way, say something like the Workers' Party has, right? Where Liu Tiakang was kind of often the face of, for a long time, the Workers' Party and then Sylvia Lim, and they evolved quite a bit, and so they no longer are kind of personality-based. SPP has not had quite as much an evolution, I think. And so it's hard to see, where the loyalties lie again. And so it might end up being, if it's not about having that the local constituency has that kind of loyalty, then it might just be people are choosing, which party on a national scale do they really support. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that with SMCs, the individual candidates matter that much more. Yeah. You're looking at the personalities, their histories, and I have to say, unfortunately, Williamson is a little bit of an unknown entity to me. I don't really know that much about him, but in contrast, for instance, having worked and tracked political developments in Singapore for a while, I know that, for instance, Alex Yeo has been had been in Aljunied prior to being moved over to Potong Pasir. And actually, before this current PAPCC, he was in the previous iteration of the Central Executive Committee as well, which goes to show, that there is certain trust that the party places in him and that they clearly do see the potential for him to be a potential member of parliament, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't have fielded him as a candidate in Aljunied. But clearly by moving him to Potong Pasir, I think there is definitely the desire to see him and also the belief that he could potentially win as well. Yeah.
All right.
Well, let's talk about the third person, the third candidate in Potong Pasir. So maybe out of a lineup of relative unknowns, I guess, to most of Singaporeans. Mr. Lim Tian is probably the most recognizable face. In GE2020, he led a People's Voice team to contest Jalan Besar GRC but lost to PAP after garnering 34% of the votes. What do you expect his vote share to be in Potong Pasir and SMC this time around?
So, one interesting observation I've had about Mr. Lim Tian, this election specifically, is the change in position that a lot of people had about him. Because, one is his televised appearance on the forum, whereby they felt like he was taking on a different approach to public speaking, a lot more measured this time. His hair was combed very neatly, so the way he was presenting himself is quite different from how we used to see him, which was, how I would say quite angry in the past. And even, some of the listeners of my podcast, he came on the show, he, explained to us what the PAR was. And they said, I went into this podcast ready to be upset with him, right? But by the end of it, I actually, was more accepting of who he was. And I think that, something somewhere changed halfway, whereby we see how he's really repositioning his public image, at least in my perspective. Someone else that has done that is Dr. Chee Soon Juan as well. His public persona is really changing with the digital age. And I do think, at least with the younger voters, these politicians who, did have kind of a reputation in the past are now appealing to a lot of younger voters today. And I genuinely do think that, yeah.
All right. So if you're just tuning in and listening to us, we were just chatting about Potong Pasir SMC. Let's check in on another familiar one, Bukit Panjang, which is the stage for a rematch of a tight 2020 race.
Well, that year, the PAP's Liang Eng Hua narrowly defeated Dr. Paul Tambaya from the SDP with 53.73% of the vote. Well, their contest was the closest among all the SMCs at GE 2020. Is it round 2? This time? Will it be that close?
Yeah, so based on how the hustings have gone this election, will voters, as Ollie said, see a close fight? What do y'all think?
Well, in my opinion, I definitely think that there's an excitement around Dr. Paul. I think since the last GE, I think he has gained a lot of ground, whether it's because of COVID and his expertise there, media appearances, podcast appearances. I do think that at least, among the voters that are younger leaning, he's definitely won them over. And for the SDP's episode on my podcast, he was a representative that they sent over. And when I announced that he was the representative for the party, I was very surprised because so many of the listeners were celebrating and they were like, yes, we're excited to listen to him and he's a great person to represent the party as well. So I think he has definitely in the last 5 years managed to gain a lot of momentum on the ground. And I think that's why, his SMC is the one, has become one of those to watch. Yeah, what do you guys
certainly
think?
COVID helped, right? Because he became kind of the face of the so you had obviously the government task force, so that helped, people like, Lawrence Wong and so forth gain their face, but also Paul Tambaya using his own expertise, in infectious diseases, right, was able to come out and share. And I think that that kind of talking about his expertise or using his expertise created an image of somebody who was very competent. I mean, he is very competent, right? But affirm this idea of being able to demonstrate his competency, like many opposition, candidates don't often have, because there are not many opportunities for, opposition candidates to be on the public stage except when it's time for election. And Paul Tambaya had quite an extended period of time, right, unfortunately due to COVID, to demonstrate his expertise, to demonstrate his calm, to demonstrate his ability to kind of, despite all that was going on, to assure Singaporeans. And of course, then he has that, and then this is carried over, right? And I think that positive, memory or impression that everybody had is carried over to be like, we are an opposition individual that we can trust. So he gave off that, I think, impression of trustworthiness, which I think is well earned, especially when it came to COVID. And I think that's something that, Singaporeans feel comfortable with, the sense of, he's not, all over the place. He's very focused and he's a very assuring character when he speaks, I think. He has this sort of very chill, very calming vibe. When I'm listening, I'm like, everything will be fine. Yeah. And he's not like overly vitriolic, which I think some Singaporeans some Singaporean voters have a concern about, which is, I think, like when I've spoken to some like older voters, that's one of their issues with, for example, Dr. Chi, that he's often presented as very vitriolic, whether that's true or not. That's the image, and he tends to polarize voters. Yeah.
I just want to get Nydia's thoughts.
I think not only, did we see his heightened public profile as the infectious disease expert during the pandemic, I think, kudos to him for also continuing to maintain his visibility through community engagement over the last 5 years. And I think, if I was a betting man, I would say that he is really SDP's best chance at getting a seat at the parliament this time around.
All right. So let's go back to talking about GRCs. And I want to talk about West Coast Jurong West GRC, a new 5-member constituency. Now, it merged a large part of West Coast GRC with parts of Jurong GRC. That's a lot of GRCs. Absorbing voters from President Tharman Shanmugaratnam's former stronghold, Taman Jurong.
That's right. Well, the new GRC also ceded parts of Telok Blangah and Dover to Tanjong Pagar GRC, one more count for GRC, and parts of Harbourfront and Sentosa to Radin Mas SMC.
Now, in the 2020 general election, the PAP narrowly won the then West Coast GRC against the PSP team with 51.68% of the vote. Now, that was the smallest win margin for the PAP. Now, with the redrawn boundaries, the constituency has voters from Taman Jurong, which, in contrast, had the biggest win margin in 2020. So this time around, the PAP will be going up against a PSP team again.
Yep, so let's take a look at the candidates for the ruling party. They have fielded Minister Desmond Lee, Sean Huang, Mr. Ang Wei Neng, and new faces Hamid Razak and Cassandra Lee. And on the PSPs, and they have put forth a team of senior leaders, the A-team, right? That includes the party's founder and chairman, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, its Secretary General Leong Man Wai, and its Vice Chairperson, Hazel Phua. Also on their team are Sumaleki Amja and Sani Ismail.
All right, so housing has been a hot button issue this election. And with Minister for National Development, Desmond Lee, leading the West Coast Jurong West team, how much could that shape the fight there? Because the PSP has campaigned a lot about, land costs and housing. Yeah, so what do you make of how that fight will shape up?
Or Nydia, you want to
yeah,
start us off?
I was thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, I can take this one. But for me, I think, it really boils down to whether or not the PSP team is convincing enough for the voters.
Because this is their A-team that they...
It really is. And, if let's just rewind time a little bit to GE2020, and it was Dr. Tan Cheng Bock's debut election with the PSP. He formed this new party. There was a lot of excitement around him because, he narrowly lost the presidential elections, and people were just trying to see whether or not he would do well in the GE 2020, and they did perform relatively well especially for a new party, right? They did gain 2 NCMP seats the last election. So with this team, this time around, it's not just Dr. Tan Cheng Bock. It is now with Mr. Leong Man Wai and Ms. Hazel Phua as well. So they have had the 5 years as NCMPs to build momentum, to gain visibility. Certainly today, more people on social media at least recognize the two of them more than they would in GE 2020. So it's whether or not their performance has convinced the voters there that they deserve their vote. And of course, I think Dr. Tan Cheng Bock is still a big pool. Over this election period, I did manage to secure a short interview with him, posted that on social media, and I just saw that post do really well in terms of numbers, and that to me just signaled that he still resonates with a lot of Singaporeans, and the way he speaks, you can just feel that conviction that he has in him. So yeah.
I just want to quickly follow up on that because Dr. Tan is actually turned 85 during this election, right? So will that factor into how voters vote? Because a lot of the candidates are quite young from all the parties. I mean, there's a lot of younger members fielded. Yeah.
I mean, the PSP team has said that this would be his last election, so there is that emotional factor as well that they are definitely playing up. But I think at least for young voters on social media, they don't see his age as a negative thing. I think they actually see it more as someone with wisdom that he can share with the team. And when you listen to, for example, the new faces that the PSP has fronted, like Stephanie Tan, she has been sharing how Dr. Tan has been quite a big mentor figure for her as well, sharing with her his experience and insights. So we do see that relationship that he has with the rest of the party as well. Yeah.
Dr. Tan, has said that this will likely be his last election.
Yes.
So if the PSP does not win any seats or become NCMPs, what do you think will be the future of the party? Rebecca or Nydia?
I think they have. We talked about personality-driven parties, right? Like, for example, SPP, and I think PSP's been doing that, right? So notably, of course, that Dr. Tan didn't take up the NCMP position, right? But instead gave it to Mr. Long Wan Mai and Ms. Hazel Phua, and I think that allowed them to gain that visibility, so that the PSP no longer is identified as Dr. Chan's party. So what happens? If he no longer stands, then there's no recognizability and there's no kind of brand anymore when your leader is no longer there. So I think there's been that kind of deliberate effort to build a name for the PSP that is distinct from Dr. Tan, because obviously he can't be around forever. He isn't going to be around forever. And so it's not based upon his personality, nor upon his name brand. I think that's been a deliberate effort. And I think the NCMPs have, done a credible job in the past, this past term that they've been in Parliament, in terms of presenting themselves as an alternative opposition voice. That's also distinct from the Workers' Party, because it's obviously, as we talked about earlier, very easy for you to kind of get, lumped all into one category. And they've tried to distinguish themselves from the Workers' Party to say, we are different, we have a distinct brand. And it's distinct both from an individual and also from other opposition parties, and so we stand. So I thought that so, for example, Ms. Stephanie Tan did quite a good job at the roundtable doing that, of showing, how they were going to be distinct. And their policy positions are, in fact, quite distinct from a lot of the other parties, whether it's immigration or things like that. Yeah. Nydia?
Yeah, I think that, having the luxury of, taking up 2 NCMP posts have allowed, both Leong Man Wai and Hazel Phua to really carve out a name and build that reputation for themselves. A lot could be said about Leong Man Wai's track record in Parliament. He can be a bit of a polarizing character, and we've seen him gotten into a number of controversies during Parliament. But I think it has only helped to have that track record to point back to, especially when they're talking about, what they can do. That said, with the races that are coming up this round, it's really hard to say whether or not they would still maintain those positions or if they could actually win those seats. I think amidst all the noise about Tampines and Punggol, West Coast has sort of fallen a little bit off the radar, except for the fact that this is, PSP's A team. So I think it really is hard to tell at this point also, but I think it's great. It's a good thing that, I think Desmond is still fielded as the PAP's anchor minister, taking over after Iswaran had to step down, obviously.
That's right. Well, thank you so much. So, everyone, if you're just joining us, this is the Straits Times, a special coverage of GE2025. It's about 9 p.m, so an hour since the polls have closed, and counting of your votes is currently underway.
And in about 30 minutes, the Elections Department is expected to release the first sample count. And getting through the sample counts for each and every electoral division should take about an hour or so, and we'll be here for that entire process.
Right, well, the Straits Times is bringing GE2025 right to your fingertips. Check out our live blog for all the latest developments coming out of polling night.
And don't forget our interactive page. Now, that will be really useful when the results start coming in. Now, from nomination day to 9 days of campaigning, we've tracked the action from walkabouts, speeches, and interviews.
So let's take a look back to some of the defining moments in colour and sound. Here's our GE2025 Rewind.
There is much at stake in this election.
Let us keep up the momentum.
Good morning. I am Gan Kim Yong.
Dear residents of Yio Chu Kang,
be retired, not tired.
Alternate, it's time.
Not just survive. PTSD to Parliament. Yay! That's of the big reason. Yay! And also SGB. Money don't fall from the sky.
First-class citizens in their own country. The PAP brings out Labubu. Hougang belongs to you. This is the future I want for all of us.
This is your family, your future, our Singapore.
We promise to play our part in building a proud and successful Singapore for all of you, for all our people.
Choose the best candidates. Choose the best party to serve your constituency and our country. But above all, choose unity. Choose Singapore.
Well, and to help us break down the sample count results as they come in about hopefully half an hour's time, we are joined by three guests tonight. Dr. Rebecca Tan from NUS, Joelle Lim, host of the Political Prude podcast, and Nydia Ngiow, Singapore Managing Director at consultancy BowerGroupAsia. So on to the 5-member East Coast GRC. From the west, we zip over to the east, right? So where the WP has been chipping away at the PAP's vote share since 2006.
Now, in GE2025, it absorbed Marine Parade GRC's Joo Chiat Ward and Chai Chi's public housing estates. The PAP and WP were very tight-lipped about their slates in East Coast. Now, both parties definitely left us guessing right up until nomination day.
And so this is the matchup that we got after nomination day. Contesting for the PAP in East Coast is Minister Edwin Tong, joined by Tan Kiat Hao, Jessica Tan, and the new faces over there, Dinesh Vasudash and Hazlina Abdul Halim. As for the WP slate, we have former NCMP Yee Jianzhong, Nathaniel Koh, Paris V. Parameswari, Sophia Mikhail Putra, and Jasper Kwan.
All right, so I'm going to rewind all the way back to nomination day. And on that day, we found out that DPM Heng Swee Keat, who was leading the team in East Coast at that time, retired from politics, right? What would voters make of this announcement on that day? And they have a new anchor minister with Edwin Tong there, right?
Yeah. I mean, he entered the nomination hall, right? Which was like the whole surprise, right? Is that we were left all the way up until, the names were announced. Because he entered the nomination hall, so everybody was expecting, him being in the papers, right? And he comes out and then, this news of his retirement, I think was so surprising. Obviously, the G2020 was not kind to him, right? Especially since he was, slated to be the next Prime Minister. And so, felt quite sorry for him, I think, at the end. It was fairly unceremonious to finally sort of be brought to retire. So I think it's maybe the concern that, if he let it again, East Coast voters would say, the first time we already gave you this mandate, right? If we talk about voter voting outcomes being like a mandate or a sign of faith in a candidate and or their team, would it be increased likelihood of losing East Coast because East Coast voters went, we didn't like Heng Swee Keat 2020, what has changed, and they react worse this time around. So I guess that's the idea, is that rather than kind of take that gamble again, to switch. Of course, then I'm sure had his own personal reasons for stepping back as well. But I'm sure that tactically it made more sense maybe to start with a newer slate. Cleaner slate.
That's an interesting point, I guess, because I also felt like a lot of the 2020 voters maybe didn't vote against DPM Heng, but more for Nicole Sias and her team as well. So it was interesting to see that, with Ms. Sia not competing this time around, that he too decided to retire. Yeah,
but I think also just adding to that fact that if you looked at, if you did that rewind and looked at the East Coast GRC slate a year ago, it was very heavyweight team. You had DPM, you had Minister Maliki, you had SMS Tan Kiat Hao, and then you had Jessica Tan, who was a deputy speaker, and then also Cheryl Chan, who at that time was in the CEC too. So you could see that every single candidate on that slate was someone that had definitely a lot more responsibilities within the party, and so I would say that in addition to DPM Heng retiring, I guess for East Coast voters maybe it's not that much of a surprise or not that big of a loss, but I would argue that for instance maybe Cheryl Chan and Maliki also retiring or not choosing not to run this round might hurt a bit more as well.
So, and the fact that, there's so many new faces on both sides in East Coast. So do you think that it is risky for them and to counter all the retirements and or the incumbents stepping down? So do you think it's risky to have so many new faces in the party contesting GE2025, of course, vis-a-vis your performance in the election?
Well, before I answer that question, can I just say that a lot of us thought a new face on the PAP team would be Joseph Schooling on that
when
day.
He showed up?
Because he showed up on nomination day next to Minister Edwin Tong. And a lot of the chat groups were like, is Joseph Schooling running? But turns out he was just a proposer and not a new face. So, but that would have been certainly quite exciting to be
Who knows?
watching.
Maybe, who knows? We'll be back here in a few years' time talking about Mr. Schooling. Huh?
But to answer your question, with the new faces, I think they made the right choices in the PAP new faces at least. I think Miss Haslina has certainly gained a lot of traction on social media. She did come by to the podcast to do an interview with us, and from the feedback that I got from listeners, I think they felt like she was one of the more personable PAP candidates who tend to have kind of like a very proper image, when they speak. But for her, they find her very candid and like relatable, and sincere and genuine. So at least for her, she's definitely reaching out to the younger audience, which I guess was a bet that paid off. Yeah.
Nydia, you want to add on? Or I'm going to ask this question because PM Wong made a point a couple of times throughout this election that losing ministers will weaken the cabinet, the government and Singapore. And it's a scenario that could happen in this hotly contested GRCs. We could lose Mr. Tong, for example. How do you think this battle will play out between the PAP and WP, as well as in Punggol, as we were earlier talking about, and in Tampines as well?
I think that is the risk that the party will have to take, because they are the ones who ultimately decide who they are going to be fielding on this chessboard, right? So I think, the decision to field, for instance, DPM Gan in Punggol definitely was a decision that was made clearly at the last minute, as even some of his Chua Chu Kang mates had attested to as well. But I think that, this is really par for the course, and, there are consequences to certain actions, and this is something that, a risk that definitely people will have to take. And I think that's also why the PAP has come out so strongly to say, this is his a task force man. He's indispensable. We need him to deal with a lot of the geopolitical developments that are taking place currently. But similarly to Mr. Edwin Tong too, he has, I think, just given his background and, when he was being introduced initially as a candidate with his legal background, he was definitely one that was seen as a political office holder, potentially even succeeding, Law Minister K. Shanmugam at some point. And I think that, that is just a risk that the party would have to take just because of how they decided at that point what worked best for them in terms of strategy. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's now about 9:12 p.m. So we are expecting those first sample counts very, very shortly. But before they come in, we have a bit of time, right? So shall we quickly discuss the 3 WP held constituencies? There are, of course, Aljunied GRC, excuse me, Sengkang GRC and Hougang SMC. So do you expect any surprises in any of these 3 areas?
Not really. I mean, I can go. I think they've been very quiet. I think there hasn't been anything that, in terms of both the teams that are fielded by the PAP, No huge surprises, so no big names on any of the teams. But also just it hasn't. Yeah, you haven't seen the clash of the teams as much because it's almost kind of taken for granted. So like, they're not focusing on the team against them. So, for example, like Pritam Singh is not focusing on the team against him. He's kind of, as we talked about earlier, like shifted his focus to an entirely different constituency by focusing on, say, DPM Gan. So I think it's almost kind of taken for granted. Maybe on the ground it's different, but certainly in the rally speeches and everything, it's been far less focused on kind of going head to head with the team against you or the candidate against you. But yeah, but it's hard to tell, I think. It depends on sometimes whether you work the ground, whether, voters like you as well. Yeah, that's harder to see, I think, unless we are all kind of shaking hands and chatting to the individual.
I wonder too if, these races have been a little bit quieter so far because the candidates for them have been introduced way beforehand. Like I think the Sengkang candidates were introduced in 2022 or 2023, very early on. And so I would say that in those races that any discourse might have happened a bit earlier and people have had more time to get to know these candidates and also get to know what they stand for, and so there weren't as many surprises there just because of that the amount of time that people had. I would say though that I guess the biggest controversy out of all of this is the constant switching of the PAP candidates. So it seemed like PAP had taken a trial and error approach when it came to introducing its candidates. In Hougang, for instance, it saw like 2 rounds of switches, and then also in Sengkang, I think Bernadette Giam's position was previously held by someone else, Marcus Loh, before, and then before it was held by Ling Wei Hong as well. So I think, it seemed like the party was still trying to figure out what would be the best mix of candidates, but it didn't stop them from introducing them prior to that and just making sure that they were known to residents as well.
So will the results in Aljunied, Sengkang and Hougang be indicative of the sentiment in nearby Punggol GRC, where the WP is contesting as well, perhaps in Tampines GRC? Will it be a run-on effect?
It's hard to say because these places have already been held by the opposition for the time being, right? And I think, if you look at how Hougang has gone, I think in the past couple of elections, it's really, the vote share for Workers' Party has been in the 60% range. And I think the only time it went to less than 60% was in 2015, which was a little bit of an anomaly, but I would say could be attributed to SG50 and Minister Mentor passing at the time. So I would say that it may not necessarily be too indicative of how results will go in Punggol and some of the other adjacent races as well.
Right, well, thank you so much, Nydia. So, Singaporeans, no doubt, on tenterhooks as we wait for the first sample count results. But first, let's take you to Hougang, where many Workers' Party supporters have gathered ahead of the result. You can see those recognizable yellow hammers right there. It's a coffee shop where WP supporters traditionally meet every general election. You can see it's very, very crowded. We only have a while to go till the first sample count comes in, and maybe about an hour and a half more before the actual result comes in, but that is not stopping these people from gathering already to make sure that they are there to, of course, celebrate or perhaps commiserate when the results come in. All right, so going back to our discussion about the WP held constituencies, Hougang being one of them, of course. So if the WP doesn't win any extra seats or make further inroads, what does it say about, what voters make of the party, despite many people turning up at their rallies?
I think a lot of people have said about huge numbers turn up in Workers' Party rallies is obviously not necessarily representative of public sentiment for a few reasons. One is there's a novelty, right? People go because Workers' Party rallies are known to have a certain kind of vibe, and so people go there for the experience. If you want to experience a rally, if you can't make it for any of the others, there's one you should go for, and that's always a Workers' Party rally, right? So people go there almost as like a tourist from other constituencies. I know people who are like Holland Bukit Timah, and then they'll travel all the way to Punggol for the Workers' Party rally, and it's kind of the novelty of like having that feeling of, because you don't have the same vibe in many of the other rallies. So that's one thing, right? You have lots of visitors from other constituencies, but the other thing as well is that a lot of people turn up doesn't necessarily mean they made up their minds yet either. So even if they are residents, they might watch the rally, but doesn't necessarily mean they agree with everything being said either. So I think it's quite hard to tell, even though the numbers have been huge. But yeah, it's always fun to kind of see what goes on with the rallies. But
this time around, there's a new factor that we have to consider as well, and that's social media. A lot of the people who attended these rallies, especially the one on the muddy, rainy night, a lot of them created vlogs, typical follow me to an election rally, right? And a lot of them did post that, and we saw those gaining a lot of numbers, and especially among young first-time voters, especially when they look at something like that, they, when you add in like the emotional music and, the narration of it, a lot of them say, actually, this is quite cool, and in the past, a lot of people say that WP rallies have a lot of people that come from all over the country, so they might not necessarily be voting there, but, let's see if these videos that are making their rounds are reaching the constituencies that, the WP is contesting in as well. I, for one, have spoken to a lot of first-time voters, and these vlogs, especially of people going to the rallies and persevering the rain and the mud, certainly has left an impression on first-time voters. So I think something to note with the new generation of voters as well.
I saw someone bring a rabbit to a rally, and I was just like,
that may not be the best.
I know. It's like it was one of those vlogs also, and I was just like.
Yeah, I saw someone had brought a cat too in the bag with the,
it was like a whole vlog of here's my rabbit at a workers at some rally, and I was just like, that's one way of getting eyeballs, lah. But.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask about an issue that happened. Do you think the Raisa Khan controversy and Mr. Pritam Singh trial subsequently have, affected how voters think of the WP, especially in Sengkang where that issue happened? Yeah, what do you make of it?
Surprisingly, it didn't come up at all this election, or at least certainly not dominating the headlines or the rallies. I feel like people have moved on. I did do this other podcast, and one of the co-hosts did say, did mention that. But outside of, that show, I felt like on the social media space, it hasn't really popped up, which was, certainly a surprise, especially against, NTUC Alliance. But yeah, I think to answer your question, I think people have seemed to move on, at least on social media.
I think the other thing as well is that the other explanation could also be that because, Mr. Singh's made quite clear he's going to appeal it. Right, so I think you don't want to make too big a political hash of it in the event, because it's still in the court. It hasn't been, because he's appealing, it's not settled yet, right? And so, do you want to kind of make a big deal out of it if later on you end up kind of eating your words? But the other thing as well is, I was talking to some friends, and the other issue that we were surprised has not come up quite as much as we thought it would be with the SSWaran case. And if we're kind of trading barbs between the two, between Workers' Party and the PAP, if the PAP brings up, Pritam Singh's law case, and then the Workers' Party then goes, but look at Iswaran, neither side end up coming out smelling particularly good, I think. Yeah. So it's easier just to let the sleeping dogs lie. Let's focus on something that is, it's easier for us to focus on, whether it's NTUC, Alliance, which is, Workers' Party is like, we did our job, we raised the questions, it's not our fault, we can't be vilified in this narrative. Whereas when you start bringing up, so-and-so has like an issue with personal integrity, and this might be representative parties, then we also get into kind of the mudslinging that we've seen in previous elections a little bit more. I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing that we haven't kind of gone down that route so much this election. But I do think that the parties probably, I was surprised that the Iswaran case didn't come up at all. I think Dr. Chi brought it up. when he did his speech on like the litany of the PAP's failings, I think, when he was in the CBD, his lunchtime rally. Then he brought that up. But largely we haven't heard it as a major sticking point.
Yeah.
When talking about, for example, like West Coast, it hasn't come up, even though Iswaran was West Coast as well.
It's true.
But I also wonder whether or not the parties are also making a concerted effort to not talk about Pritam Singh's, conviction, because we have seen also, when that initially came out, how he actually kind of reaffirmed his position as the underdog, and that didn't really work in the ruling party's favor. And I think one of the things that I really recall the most from that incident was when he did the doorstop, and then there were all these questions about whether or not he was going to step down. And then he said instead of stepping down, it's actually time for him to step up. And I was like, oh wow, that's a really smart thing to say at that time. So I think also, just based on that, I think that it can be easily twisted to the Workers' Party's favour, and not necessarily something that the ruling party might want to get into at this point, just for fear of potential backlash.
The WP is so strong at the hashtag game. Step Up became this whole campaign, slogan, and throughout the campaign season, after the muddy rallies, hashtag Not White became another rallying cry. So I feel like whoever's in charge of the WP hashtags and slogans doing a great job.
Is it your clothes are not white, or is the sky not white?
Oh, that one, yes.
I mean, I'm not sure where the hashtag, which one that is, but it's like reference to Michael Teng's speech or the mud. Probably both, I guess.
Well, can we talk about Sengkang before we move on? So, while that GRC has not grown as significantly as other places, it has become the largest 4-member constituency. About 30% of the residents over in Sengkang are working adults aged between 26 and 45 years old, and 28% are between 46 and 65 years old. So, the WP slate you can see over there, He Ting-ru, James Lim, Louis Chua are the first-term MPs who won the GRC back in 2020. So, given that, they were all new faces then, right? Fresh green faces. So given that voters have had 5 years to get familiar with each of them, and now we have a new face there, Abdul Muhaimim, right? So given that, they are more familiar largely with the WP slate, will they still resonate with voters this second time around?
I mean, at least on the social media space or with younger demographic, the trio of He Ting-ru, James Lim, as well as Louis Chua, they have gained a lot of goodwill among that demographic, because of course, Ms. Raisa Khan had to step away from politics, and they were seen to have stepped up to then, cover for her constituents. And I think that's obviously not an easy feat, because, it used to be a job that was shared among 4 people, and now 3 people are taking on that. So certainly, on that front, people are more sympathetic and empathetic towards the 3 of them. At the same time, I think the 3 of them have conducted themselves pretty well in Parliament as well. The kinds of questions they asked, the issues that they have brought forward, all 3 have done pretty well, in my opinion. And whether or not you agree with their policies or whatnot, I think what people want to see is that, if you say that you're an opposition voice and you will speak up in Parliament, do you speak up? And I think yes, and I think they all have. So from my perspective, a lot of young people do see them in a positive light. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that, Joel. We have more live pictures coming in, and this time from Ballot Stadium, where PAP supporters have gathered. And we're waiting for the first sample count results from the Elections Department, which is expected very shortly. Now, getting through the sample counts for each and every electoral division should take about an hour or so, and we'll be here for the entire process.
That's right. So this is Ballot Stadium, where, as Nat said, the PAP supporters are gathering. So we are expecting people from the teams contesting Punggol, East Coast, Sengkang, Aljunied, Hougang, Tampines Changkat, and Jalan Besar. All their people to gather here, and probably more to stream in as the night goes on.
Oh, those signs lighted up, yeah.
Did you guys see the Sun Xueling fan signs?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, wow. K-pop idol.
It looks like a whole concert there, because they've got fans and they've got clappers and
it's like NDP.
flags. Yeah, it's a PAP parade there with their supporters.
And the weather is holding up, right? We haven't had the best weather over the past 9-10 days, but
this morning too.
This morning wasn't good, but I think the rain is staying away for now.
For now,
The clappers for fanning themselves. I can't tell. It's like Do they work? Do they work the fan? I've never.
I don't know actually.
Yeah, I think some of them are doubling up with
know, right?
making it. Yeah. Yes. So there again, pictures
Are we on air?
from the stadium in Ballot.
All right, so as we are watching these PAP supporters, let's talk about the PAP SecGen. Why not?
Yeah.
So this is PM Lawrence Wong's first election as Prime Minister and SecGen of the PAP. Should we expect that he would get a resounding mandate in his home turf of Marsiling UT?
I think it will not be a surprise if he does do well in his home turf of Marsiling UT. I think we have already seen that the personal popularity is one thing, and then is another thing for the overall party popularity as well. So I do think that he would probably do fairly well in his home turf, and I think I think definitely residents have that sense of pride that comes with having a prime minister come from your GRC. So I think that that will help in terms of bolstering the support in his GRC.
What kind of vote share do you think, the range of it, that would be satisfactory for Marsiling UT?
He was in the mid. Lawrence Wong last year was about 63% of the vote. So I imagine around there, hopefully a bit more. I think
63.18.
Yeah. So I think that would probably be desirable. The other thing as well is he's also benefiting. I don't know if this is fair. He from the disarray that you see in his opposing team, right? The SDP team, and kind of the own goals from the whole situation with Jijin Wong, right? And Mr. Arifin Shah. You want to bring it up, I think it's been talked about quite a bit. But I think that team has not been as cohesive. And so, once again, right, we don't see the focus. Lawrence Wong hasn't had to focus too much on his direct opponents, and he's been able to focus on, defending DPM Gan and things like that. So he's able to shift his sights elsewhere. But that's also because the SDP team is not necessarily being as cohesive in terms of their focus, because they've ended up having to defend themselves from themselves. So I think that's helped Lawrence Wong kind of shift his focus away from his local battle to a national-based battle. I
think it's also helped that he doesn't have any new candidates that he has to introduce within his own team as well. And I think, one of the things that, one of the questions that popped up was also, why doesn't he have any new candidates to introduce within his own team? Whereas, for instance, Minister K. Shanmugam has 4 new members in his team that he has to kind of usher or introduce to residents. But I think that's also helped him in terms of, at least within the Marsiling UT GRC itself, saying that, these are the same people that have helped you, their track record, and therefore it makes it a lot easier for them to actually, I think, help boost the popularity within that GRC as well.
Well, Rebecca, you talked about, PM's, I guess, vote share in the GRC, and then you talked about also nationally. So on that note, what percentage of the national vote share would be a good result for him and his 4G team again? Because again, it's his first general election, and just to give context, the PAP's vote share in GE2020 was 61.23%. I
think maintaining it will probably be considered good, because it is his first general election, right? So he has to kind of maintain. That's always the good standard. But they haven't been focused so much on the vote share. Now, vote share matters, but how that translates to the seats is where I think the large discussion has been, right? Who loses their seats, but also what's the number of seats being returned? Do they still have 2/3 majority in Parliament? Things like that. So the vote share is important as a broader kind of signal of public sentiment. But we can know that you can have because of the way the electoral system works, you can have 60% of the vote, and over 2/3 of the seats, right? And there's a disproportionality there. So the effectiveness of government comes down to how much you control in Parliament. The vote share is nice to have, but they're very focused on, even if every GRC is close to 50%, and it's they're squeaking through, if they still have 2/3 majority, to them that's still a mandate, right? And this was the argument that was given even in the results, even with G2020 coming out, right, was that the vote share dropped. But, it was still a mandate insofar as all, almost everywhere he was returned, right? And Lee Hsien Loong saw that as still a mandate for the PAP nonetheless. And they, in terms of real power, that's where the real power is. Obviously, symbolically, they can say, more voters are, if the vote share drops, even if they don't lose any seats, people might say symbolically it signifies that more Singaporeans are, less supportive. But the real power of passing laws and things like that still maintains the same. We're still going to see the same. So I think it's hard to kind of tell what the vote share was meaningful because, it comes down to how close the margins are in every single GRC, because sometimes you get very wide margins, right? So, for example, Taman used to carry a lot of that wide margin, right? He's no longer there. So if that shrinks, then we might see an overall shrinkage, for example. Yeah.
And I think also, if you were to look at just the vote share, we've only had this twice before where we had a new Prime Minister come in. And each time that they have done so, for instance, Goh Chok Tong in 1992 and then Lee Hsien Loong in 2006, the vote share for those elections have always been a little bit worse than the election before. So I think, we can expect that he may not do as well. But if he maintains the vote share at around that 61% mark, I think that would be very good for the ruling party. And I think that would be, if he goes above that and defies expectations, then even better. But the likelihood of that is anyone's guess. I would also, just double down on Rebecca's point to say that, even though they did better in GE 2020 with 61% versus 2011 when they did 60%. In 2011 they only lost one GRC. In 2020 they lost two GRCs. So even with that higher vote share, so I think at the end of the day, I think that two-third majority is the more important sign or signal of popularity and also that stronger mandate that I think PM Wong is seeking to achieve.
Just one side note is that a disadvantage that Lawrence Wong has is that he has such a short runway as PM in the lead up to this election as well. I think it's been less than a year. So, that would play into to the whole thing as well. Yeah.
Plus also adding on to this whole idea of him being compared to other PMs. All the previous PMs have not had to compete in the general elections, in their first run, right, for general elections with most constituencies being challenged, right? And so the vote share is more representative of public sentiment, whereas we've never had such a litmus test of public sentiment for a new PM in previous general elections because we had so many walkovers, right, all the way until about 2011. And so I think that's a big difference as well, is that it'll be a bigger signal of how much public support is if he gets 60%, because if he's able to maintain it from Lee Hsien Loong, then it's a more of a national mandate, whereas previously we never had that kind of data on how much support there was for the PAP government. With a new Prime Minister in charge. So this will be new, yeah.
All right, talking about previous Prime Ministers, I want to talk about SM Lee for a bit, because he's no longer in charge of Singapore. He is still standing in Ang Mo Kio GRC. Will he still receive high ratings from residents there? It's also one of the 5 multi-cornered fights tonight. What do you make, Joel?
I mean, you also have to look at the opponents in his constituency.
And we have it up on the...
Yeah, so I guess he's going up against the PPP and the SUP here. Who, in my opinion, maybe have not had that large of an impact, at least in terms of visibility online. For the PPP, I think Mr. Samuel Lee did get a bit of attention online with his interviews and maybe some singing.
One of our quotable quotes, definitely.
Don't sing it.
Yeah.
Please sing it.
I look now. But yes, but apart from that, I think the two teams here that are going against him, I felt like could have definitely seen a lot more visibility online in order to mount a stronger challenge to Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. But yeah, I think I'm quite interested to see how the vote share turns out for him. First one, not as PM.
Right. SUP is a new party and they're only contesting this GRC.
Yeah.
So they haven't been able to get much visibility elsewhere. So it's the PP is more established, whereas the SUP has virtually no kind of track record for voters to kind of judge against. Yeah.
All right. So we are all waiting for the first sample count results to be released, including these Workers' Party supporters at Serangoon Stadium who have gathered ahead of the results. Let's have a look. All right, so that's a very full stadium there with people having, they brought out their posters and yellow hammers as well. and they have gathered to hear the results of the WP, where the WP is contesting, to see how they have fared as well.
Yeah, here's hoping that, for all their efforts tonight, they would have had some of the WP candidates going to see them over at Serangoon Stadium. Win or lose, hopefully they would be able to meet the candidates that they have supported during this GE. So at Serangoon Stadium, we are expecting the candidates or the supporters or the teams that are contesting Punggol, East Coast, Sengkang, Aljunied, Hougang, Tampines and Tampines Changkat for the Workers' Party. And we are back at Bedok Stadium, which is where the PAP supporters have gathered. So we are still waiting for those sample counts to come in from the elections department, which are expected very, very shortly. We hope it's about 9:38, so they should be coming in any moment now. So getting through the sample counts for each and every electoral division should take an hour or so, and we'll be here for that entire time. So those signs coming out again. I'm still not spotting any signs. You guys are talking about Sun Xueling signs. I cannot see those signs.
It's a lot of love for the PAP.
Yeah, so of course Sun Xueling is contesting Punggol. So they're expected to show up there along with East Coast, Sengkang, Aljunied, Hougang, Tampines, Tampines Changkat and Jalan Besar.
They'll show party front, I think. So we can't support a single candidate.
So let's talk about the other issues that have surfaced, that have made itself known during this campaigning period. So WP Chief Pritam Singh has said many times during the campaign that the PAP will form the next government. He's been very vocal, very clear about that, meaning that there is no risk of the WP taking over, even if all of their 26 candidates are voted in. So Nydia, has that argument resonated to counter the PAP's framing that a vote for the opposition would mean a weakened mandate, weakened government, weakened Singapore?
I think that, it really depends on the constituencies you're looking at and the demographics as well. I think surely, the younger demographic, as particularly those in the younger GRCs, do want to see a more balanced government. They want to see a government that is really walking the talk when it comes to inclusivity and social issues and climate change. Maybe not so much focus so much on the cost of living, maybe because a lot of them are just younger couples, married things, maybe perhaps. But I think that definitely there is that greater desire for a more balanced government. That said, I think it is also a very uncharted territory when we talk about looking at how many seats, having a government where the PAP might not even have 2/3 of a majority. And I know that Pritam has talked about the risk of that happening being very low in this particular race, but I think that that's definitely coming in the next couple years.
Yeah. Rebecca, thoughts?
I mean, pure mathematically, it is possible, right? Many things in the world are possible. Whether it's probable is another question, but I mean, it's possible given that there's only one constituency that there's a guaranteed outcome, right? Which is Marine Parade, Battle Heights. That we might see the fabled freak election suddenly emerge, and the PAP loses all its seats, or loses half the seats. That is possible. The Workers' Party, so Pritam Singh's argument is that the Workers' Party mathematically cannot become government, meaning it cannot get 50% of the seats, because it's not contesting 50% of the seats, right? Because government is formed when you have a controlling proportion.
That's
exactly.
What has been saying.
But what could mean the worst case scenario, and this is what Lawrence Wong is kind of framing, he says, the government, it would be, the freak election frame would be, that the Workers' Party, let's say it wins all its seats or wins a large proportion of its seats, and many of the other parties also succeed, right? You end up with a situation where the PAP does not control a majority. Now, they could then form a coalition, a governing coalition with another opposition party to control half the seats, because that's how you form government, right? You need to control half of Parliament's seats. And so if you do not have an outright majority as the party, you cannot be the ruling party, obviously. You then had to create a ruling coalition. And so we see this in a lot of other countries, right? Israel does this, Belgium does this, right? A lot of other countries have done this. The UK, for example, did this with the famous sort of conservative Lib Dem coalition, which fell apart. But you have to do that. And then there'll be a lot of kind of horse trading and negotiating to say which opposition, so potentially it would be, let's say if the PAP did in fact have the most number of seats but not an outright majority, then they'd have to go to, going to the other opposition parties to say, would you form a coalition? Now, then it's up down to the opposition party, who's being asked, would I join the coalition with the PAP? Right, that would be an interesting, it's not unlikely to happen this election. It might happen if we continue to see more and more multi-party elections, right, contestations, right, so we don't see a drop in party numbers in future elections, then we might have this kind of coalition building, which creates its own share of challenges, benefits, but also challenges. It's hard to predict, I think, for Singapore what we're likely to see in future elections, but it is possible. But if you want outright Workers' Party government, Workers' Party has to contest at least half the seats and guarantee that they will win half those seats for that even to be a possibility. So that's why Pritam's right, technically, when he says Workers' Party will never form government. But also there's a paradox where Lawrence Wong is also right where he said the PAP could not be government. The PAP could lose all its seats and it only have 5 seats left in Parliament. That is possible. Improbable, but possible. Who knows, right? I'm bad at reading tea leaves, so...
Yeah, we need those numbers. Enough tea leaves, no more tea
I know,
leaves. We
right?
need those numbers.
Yeah. But let's talk about another hot word. So abandonment came up earlier on in our conversation. That was like a bit of the first half of campaigning. The word of the second half for me was negative campaigning, right? Parties lobbed accusations at each other about who did what. And I want to know, would this back and forth turn off voters who want to hear the policies that each party is putting forward? And also, could it backfire in any sense?
I think I can say this on behalf of a lot of young voters today is that we hate negative campaigning. We really don't want to see that. What we want to see is constructive criticism and also constructive conversations, about policies and, where different parties stand and what they, are going to be pushing for in Parliament. I'm going to bring this up here, and this was only because, I'm only naming this one because it's the most recent one that I noticed. So the PAP's Mr. Faisal Abdul Aziz recently at a rally speech made a jibe against the Aljunied WP team, whereby he said, there's a lot of flies in this area, and it was no wonder because it's a WP area. The comment didn't really land well online. A lot of the comments and the people who were sharing that piece of video were basically saying that, it's really quite unnecessary and they don't really want to see that kind of politics in our space. And for me, I think this election, especially with the online conversation, we're seeing a noticeable public desire to move away from that kind of politics. We don't really want to see personal attacks. We don't want to see smear campaigns, and we don't want to see character assassinations. What we want to see is policy debates and constructive critique.
Yeah. I don't know where, I always struggle with the term negative. It's been used quite loosely. So sometimes it's been used to be when you're critical of government. And I'm like, but it seems that can also be part of a policy debate, right? When I criticize a policy position, but then I might throw in, of course, terms that might seem almost like a personal attack. Right? Say, for example, the other side is naive because they talk about this policy. Is that negative? I don't know where the line's drawn here. Is it a negative attack on their character at that moment when we're an individual or a party is naive? But then we're also at the same time making a comment about the policy, and I don't know where the line's drawn. It was certainly, I think, to echo Joel's point, we saw that in the 2020 election, and I think that's one of the reasons why Sengkang, came or was won was this whole, before Raisha Khan had to step down, but there was that sense that what happened to Raisha Khan in the campaign period was a form of negative campaigning, sort of smear tactics. That's why I wonder whether something like what happened, not that the PAP is responsible for what happened to Andre Low, but whether it has similar reactions amongst people who are observing on social media. They go, someone leaked it. Now, it may not be the PAP, but, it looks like, once again, it's kind of let's attack a person because of the language they use or something they've done quite far in the past. Let's focus on who he is now. He's apologized, he's an upstanding guy, Harpreet Singh fame. Let's move away from this kind of negativity. So wondering, do somebody swear a lot in their private chats? Yeah.
But then, do you then apply that same, qualification to the social media post that came out in that Jalan Kayu SMC race as well against the PAP candidate though? Like, is that considered then negative campaigning as well? So it's very hard to kind of figure out, what exactly is negative campaigning and when do you say, okay, maybe that person has grown or maybe that person's a different person,
like how much of the benefit of the doubt do you give people, right? So like some people were saying, like for example, Andre Loh has grown up and he's a young candidate and all these sorts of things, but they're not necessarily being as charitable to Andre. I mean, there's obviously a distinction, I think. They can't necessarily be compared because Andre Loh did this in the private chat with his friends. And Ng Chee Meng's, the alleged case, with Ng Chee Meng, is that, this was done in his position as an office bearer, right? So there's a slight distinction. But I do think that there is that question of like, how much do we give people the benefit of the doubt? Or how much do we see this as a reflection of their character and it being therefore an extension of everything else? So you may have done something in a specific instance, but does it carry over to everything else? But
I wanted to quickly ask if you noticed that at WP rallies where, the WP candidate Alexis Dang was on stage or, she will often get loud calls of chobu, and it goes into what we're talking about. It's not exactly negative campaigning, but what did you make of guys being, okay, what do you make? Okay, hang on, I'm getting some news that we are getting sample count.
Some sample counts. We've been waiting a long time for this. Here we go. The SMCs are coming in. Bukit Panjang SMC. We have Liang Enghua leading Dr. Paul Tambaya 62% to 38%. This was a very close SMC back in 2020. Not as close this time around as at this point of the night. Let's move on. Another SMC sample count result is in, I should say. Next we have Pioneer SMC. Now that we have Mr. Patrick Tay, also a Labour MP, incumbent Labour MP leading Stephanie Tan 66% to 34%. And then one of the hot ones that we've been talking about tonight, Potong Pasir SMC. This one, yes, all the and the reactions here. Surprise, no surprise, Alex Yeo from the PAP leading his other two opponents 71% to Williamson Lee from the SPP's 21%, as well as Lim Tian's PAR from PAR's 8%. So let's just recap, I guess, this latest one, Potong Pasir. We talked about it quite a bit. So I think they were considered newbies, even though I know Alex Yeo and Lim Tian have been around the scene, definitely in a more public, definitely more well known to the public compared with Williamson Lee. Are you guys surprised by this lead that Mr. Alex Yeo is having?
I mean, when Mr. Tharman won his presidential election with a 70% vote share, I think a lot of people said that that's a tremendous result. And I think, with this 71%, Mr. Alex Yeo can be quite relieved and quite proud of himself for achieving that kind of result. What I'm a bit surprised by, well, maybe not so much, is maybe Mr. Lim Tian's vote share, which is just quite low at 8%.
If it stays that way, he will
lose his deposit.
That's right.
And I think the 21% for the SPP, I mean, for them, it has been a vote share that's been getting chipped away for some time now. I think that when, Mr. Sito won back the Potong Pasir from the
leadership?
Yes, I think that has already signaled that the people of Potong Pasir are willing to, leave behind their relationship with Mr. Cham Si Tong and look at different options as well. And we see that here very clearly with Mr. Alex Yeo.
Lina Cham was very close, if I remember correctly. And it's just been dropping ever since. So this is a 10% increase, I think, from last election. So
it's huge.
Assuming, be about.
So for context, what happened in GE 2020, the PAP won Potong Pasir 60.67% to SPP's 39.33%. So as you guys said, this is really quite an improvement from 2020. All right, so we have, the other big one that we were looking that just came in was Bukit Panjang, was it not? All right, so I think maybe this one we expected a tighter race at this point of the night.
Exactly.
Actually.
So let's recap. So we have Mr. Liang Enghua again leading Dr. Paul Tambaya 62% to Dr. Tambaya's 38%.
I had come out to say earlier that I thought that this was probably SDP's best chance at getting a seat in Parliament. But now looking at the results, clearly not happening unless there are some great discrepancies in the margins. But I think it also goes to show that, clearly Liang Yinghua is the one that is resonating with residents. And, the fact that he's been there for a while, I think also has definitely helped. But I am surprised that Paul Tambia has not gotten more.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about him early on in the show, how he's quite a personable guy, right?
Credible too.
Yeah. I think two things to note for this one. I think we cannot discount the 5 years that these people have on the ground, the relationships they can build as the MP. The other one is, as we have seen with the presidential elections, online traction might not translate into votes. We saw Mr. Ng Kok Song getting reels or TikToks with millions of views and a lot of comments and a lot of followers, but the vote share did not translate. When it came down to the actual votes. Certainly, I think Dr. Paul has gotten a lot of traction online over the last 5 years, but I think when we see the results here, they're also at the same time not translating to votes, and that's what matters here, I guess. Yeah.
All right, so I just want to bring your attention to the rainbow bar that we have just called up. So, of course, with the PAP leading in those 3 SMCs, plus the walkover over at Marine Parade Brattle Heights GRC, that means the PAP, if you look down there, is leading or either has won or leading in 8 constituencies, and everybody else has not gotten, has not made a foot in yet. All right, so the third SMC that came in, the sample count for that one was Pioneer, if I'm not wrong. So that one, let's call up the graphic there. Okay, so that one was Patrick Tay, right?
Yes.
I think he always stood a very strong chance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think Stephanie Tan was a very new face, even though I believe we talked about how she did rather well during that round table. She's the mentee of Dr. Tan Cheng Bok, but I think maybe just didn't have that familiarity with the Pioneer residents.
I mean, her debut was really during the campaign season. That really means that her runway is very, very short. But I do think that she signifies the future of the PSP as well. The way that the party has really put her front and center in a lot of public appearances. And I think for the most part, when I observe how people are responding to her online at least, there is a lot of positive sentiment surrounding her. So I do think that, if given the time, she will probably, gain a lot more ground in time to come and, probably do better in future elections as well.
Okay.
I would add that, with Patrick Tay being part of the Labour movement and really being, the face of training and reskilling workers. I know that he is very popular with the private sector as well. And I think that has definitely helped in terms of just getting his profile out there and showcasing what he does to help workers, especially as we talk about, jobs and, the need to transform your skills and things like that in this economy.
Yeah. Whereas PSP has been kind of the opposite. Their policies on immigration and everything are not necessarily the most popular amongst the private sector, with I think they have employment pass levy and everything being proposed, and it's quite a controversial, quite a big shift, further than even most of the other opposition parties as well. So I think they're quite strict on immigration. Yeah.
What do you make of the early sample count results coming in, and the PAP has already won 3 SMCs there?
I think the ones to watch are still the WP contests, but I do think that perhaps the SDP supporters would be feeling a little bit low right now, especially with Dr. Paul receiving not so great results. I think even the PSP, they're probably a little bit disappointed with Stephanie's showing, but for me, I think it's quite a decent showing for her actually. So hopefully, they are not too demoralized by that result. Actually, I feel like I'm right now thinking about where everyone else is receiving this program as well, and I would love to be at one of the watch parties that are happening all around Singapore. There's so many, I was reading online and sharing. So if you're watching us from a watch party, hello, and I just want to know what the atmosphere is like there. Because right now obviously it's just the five of us, and all of us are just going But if you're at a watch party, please tag us and show us what the vibe is like. What are your reactions to those? I think it's quite interesting to see that as well.
All right.
All right, we have a good timing because we have another SMC sample count in. That is Jurong Central SMC.
Wow.
Xie Yao Chen from the PAP leading by a large margin over Kala Manikam of RDU.
Margins are scary.
Wow. That's
Margins are scary.
We have another
Another one.
SMC coming in, and that's Bukit Batok SMC. So,
Bukit Gombak
oh, sorry, Bukit Gombak SMC. That's Low Yen Ling from the PAP leading with 75%, and then PSP with 25%.
Right, and straight on to another one, Sembawang West SMC, the result, the sample count over there. Polisan fielded there, right? In this new SMC, leading a very high-profile candidate here, Dr. Chi Soon-juan of the SDP, 53% to 47%. Okay, so I believe that was just the latest batch of results.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Sembawang West SMC. All right, so the move. Dr. Chi is most known for contesting Bukit Batok.
Yeah.
He's now had to move himself over to Sembawang West SMC. I guess, and maybe his presence was not as keenly felt because of just, he hasn't had the years.
Yeah. I mean, for 47% with such a short runway as well, I think it's quite a commendable performance, especially when you consider, maybe his past reputation with the older generation as well. But I think this is kind of it reflects, how people are warming up to him, right? I think this is quite a close margin, especially when we have the previous argument that existing MPs have had the 5 years to build those relationships. For Ms. Polisan to get 53% after that 5 years of competing with a newcomer, I think for Dr. Chi, that's quite a commendable result actually.
Also, it's still within the margin of error.
It is.
So it's hard to tell. I think it's about, they could go all the way to 4%, 5% from previous elections.
Good point.
So,
And I think he actually improved on his results in Bukit Batok SMC from 2020. So I think that's actually a message definitely that folks in Sembawang West are also sending, all things considered.
He outperformed Paul Tambay as well, right?
Yeah.
It's. I think we weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
Expecting the
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
To your point, in GE 2020, he lost with 45.2% of the vote against Mr. Murali from the PAP.
And then he had been in Bukit Batok
Yeah, he was
for
at Bukit
10
Batok
years
then,
prior to that. And so for him to come into Sembawang West at this point with that short runway and to get 47% of the sample count.
All right, so if you're keeping track, it is 11 seats to the PAP. Of course, 5 are confirmed because of the Marine Parade Brattle Heights walkover. But yeah, they are well within the lead. We are expecting, those were just a bunch of, I think, 6 SMCs. So we're expecting 20 more to come in. Okay, so let's move on to Bukit Gombak. Bukit Gombak was Senior Minister Low Yen Ling, right? Having a very leading by a lot against Harish Pillay of the PSP. There we go, 75% to 25%. This is probably expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though this is a new SMC, but I guess she has
Chua Chu Kang,
been...
she was out
yes,
Chua Chu Kang.
exactly.
So, Chua Chu Kang was quite safe.
She has had such high visibility as well throughout the years in her role. And I think for the most part, people do find her a very competent person too. So, I think this one, for a lot of us on social media at least, Bukit Gombak SMC was not really a battleground for us to watch. Yeah.
Maybe the same scenario that we discussed with Stephanie Tan from the PSP, because of the high visibility that her opponent, Patrick Tay, does have, similarly with Miss Low Yen Ling, and compared with, Harish Pillay, just the gulf in high or invisibility would have affected those sample counts as well. Okay,
actually, Rebecca, could you explain to our audience here why all of the sample count results so far are all from SMCs instead of GRCs?
Because SMCs, they collect 100 from each polling centre, right? And SMCs have fewer polling centres. So they've got to take from each polling centre 100 votes. They've got to count them, right? And then put them together and weigh them, depending upon each polling centre has more or less votes, right? They're not equally all spread out, right? And then they weigh it, and then they come up with the outcome. Because SMCs just have fewer votes, you have fewer polling centres, so it's easier to come up with the weighting and then the percentage.
Clear. Thanks.
I don't think any of us could have explained it better than Rebecca. So it's not necessarily how big a constituency is, right? Of course, it does factor in how fast we can expect the sample count to come in. but it's not just. I think we're going to hear a GRC coming in, so not necessarily based on
they count lah. Maybe it's also, maybe it's also the counting agents.
This is so exciting.
All right.
We're getting
I'm so
news
excited.
about Choa Chu Kang GRC, and the PAP is leading in the sample count results with 63% to the PSP's 37%.
Manpower Minister Tan See Leng there helming the PAP's Choa Chu Kang slate. Over to Queenstown SMC sample count, we have Eric Chua from the PAP leading PAR's Mahabud Bakja.
And next we have Mountbatten SMC with the PAP leading with 62% for Go Suki, and the independent candidate Jeremy Tan has gotten 38%.
Wow, one of two independent candidates.
Yeah.
Let's talk. We haven't talked about the independent candidate
Can we
at
please?
all.
Right. Yes.
Let's talk about Jeremy Tan.
Since we ended on this, let's talk about Jeremy
Can we
Tan.
please talk about him? Because I think when I first entered this election season, everyone was just talking about the different parties, right? And one tiny voice on social media went, "What about the independents?" And I went, "Oh yeah, what about the independents?" So then over the course of the election, both Jeremy Tan as well as Darryl Low came forward, and to me, I feel like they have made such a impressive campaign. They have ran such an impressive campaign in the sense that a lot of us remember the two names and not any other maybe single names that are out there, right? But even those with notable parties, or whether it's WP, PSP, or SDP, we might not know all the names of the different candidates, but a lot of us know who Jeremy Tan and Darryl Low are. And in the past, when people talk about the independents, they kind of dismiss them. But for the both of them to have come up forward and become memorable in this election, I think they did a really, really good job. At least getting in front of viewers and audiences and getting not just one visibility, but two, being able to be remembered. I think that's a fantastic thing. For Jeremy Tan there, I think a lot of the online sentiment about him was that actually he speaks with so much gusto. He is such a fantastic speaker. A lot of people who went to his rally said that his one felt like a stand-up comedy show, really, and he's a charismatic guy. But for me, and this is maybe a feedback that he could also take in, he has been very strong on the Bitcoin Association, and a lot of the people that I've spoken to with regards to him said that they actually like him as a candidate, but the Bitcoin part isn't really too convincing for them, and that's where they maybe he maybe lost them a little bit there.
Then it's impressive to you that he is trailing behind Go Suki, the PAP's candidate. He has 38%, and she currently has 62%.
He's getting his deposit back, which we can't say has happened for that many candidates in the past, right?
I mean, if you look at some of the other SMCs with parties, the vote share is significantly lower than Jeremy Tan's as well. So if let's say we do the comparative thing, I think it's doing not too bad.
It doesn't have party machinery, right? So I remember being Darryl Low is 12 people in his entire campaign team or something like that, right? And Jeremy Tan, when you saw him at the rally, it was really no auto cue. It was I think it was his phone.
Oh, he was reading
It was reading off his phone, and I was just wow. I mean, the fact he held a rally, I was that's impressive.
Definitely not as many bells and whistles. But
I was good job you managed to get a rally location. By this much.
All right, shall we move on to Choa Chu Kang?
Of course.
All right, so that was one of the latest three results that we, the latest three sample results that we got in. So that one, possibly no surprise, Manpower Minister Tan See Leng and his team of Zulkainan Abdul Rahim, Jeffrey Sell, new face there, and Chu Pei Ling leading the slate, leading the constituency at the moment. Okay, this is an important one. Here we go. Aljunied GRC, the sample count for Aljunied. We have the WPA team, shall we say, leading the PAP team 59% to 41%. We will definitely discuss this later. Okay, shall we move on to Tampines Changkat? The result there is, the sample count I should say, is also in. We have Desmond Chu 55% to the WP's Kenneth Fu 45%.
We've got another result from an SMC, that's Yio Chu Kang SMC, and the PAP team, the PAP candidate there, Ip Hon Wing, is leading with 76% of the sample count, up against the PAR candidate, Michael Fang, who has garnered 24% of the sample count vote.
Fabulous. Okay.
There you have it. All right.
Talk about Aljunied. Unless you want to talk about something else. No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aljunied. So the vote share there, as we can see on screen, 59%.
Do you
which
have the
is,
previous elections?
Yeah, so in the previous election, they got 59.95% to the PAP's 40.05%.
If it doesn't change too much, it's very similar.
Which,
do nothing else.
which also reflects that the the guilty conviction of Mr. Pritam Singh didn't really factor in this election, which is what we also felt.
And I think it just only further entrenches our GRC to be
WP strong.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. So, what do you make? So,
a lot of results coming in.
Are there more? Are there more coming in?
No, I mean, we've just gone through a whole
I want to talk about Sengkang SMC.
All right,
I think that the result there
SMC.
isn't too surprising because I think Mr. Michael Fang here has been very closely associated with quite a controversial online figure as well, who I think a lot of people find is quite like a comedic figure, like Teo En Ming. So I think with that close association, I felt like maybe people might not take Mr. Michael Fang there too seriously as well. And this is quite a large margin that Mr. Yip is leading by. So I'm certainly not too surprised by this result specifically. Mr. Teo En Ming went on to nomination day, walk side by side with Mr. Michael Fang as well on nomination day. So I feel like that very close association was quite confusing to me, especially because, let's just say that Mr. Teo is not Joseph Schooling. Yeah.
I understand. Well, okay, let's check out the rainbow bar. So if we factor in those latest results, we have the PAP still, of course, in the lead, 19 seats to them based on the sample count, but also the Marine Parade, Brattle Heights walkover, and the WP is on the board with 5 seats judging by the sample count from Aljunied GRC.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, we've been talking a lot, Joelle, we've been talking a lot about, like social media, and I know it's your favorite topic. So do you find
it's the only thing I can talk about.
Because this election was played out massively.
Exactly. And thanks to social media, do you think that voters, whether it's young or whether it's older voters, are much more engaged in this GE as opposed to the previous ones?
I mean, I think 2020 started this whole, engagement online thing. And this time around, I think it definitely has to the point where I feel like it's a little bit overwhelming. A lot of people actually were saying that they were so thankful for cooling off day this time around, just because there's just so much content going around. We see that on different levels, right? One is the content creators and platforms, a digital media platform, podcasters, creators like myself. And then you see, traditional media, like of course the Straits Times, putting out a lot of content, especially video content this time around, whether it's, the two video journalists that have been doing a really good job, I love them, and then of course your podcast as well. And then lastly, the candidates and parties themselves, they too have become influencers if you think about it. All of them are creating a lot of content this election. And I think simply because they know that this is how viewers are going to be engaged.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joel. Okay, we have to cut to breaking news because guess what? The sample count for Punggol has come in. We have the PAP team over in Punggol leading the WP team 54% to 46%. So that one we kicked off the show with it. Do you think this is okay? You know what? Let's move on to other sample counts. We will revisit.
Oh my
Hold on,
goodness.
getting ahead of myself. All right, Marymount SMC. The incumbent Gan Xiao Huang leading PSP's Jeffrey Khoo 71% to Mr. Khoo's 29%. And lastly, this batch that we have from Radin Mas SMC, PAP's Melvin Yong leading 69%. Ooh, and the independent, the second independent, as you say, Daryl Low. He is doing better than the PAR candidate.
Significantly better.
Yes.
as well.
What do we make of that?
See, I feel like we shouldn't discount the independents this time around, and I feel like the both of them are going to be
scouted by the other parties.
Okay, yes, that's one. Number two, I think they will give rise to a lot more independents showing up in the next election. That's my prediction here. Because sometimes I feel like, being associated to a party comes with its own, baggages as well. And they have shown that you cannot discount independence anymore. So I think that, we'll probably see more popping up in the next GE. Yeah. Can we talk about Punggol GRC?
Let's go back to Punggol. Just to recap those numbers for viewers, the PAP is leading a sample count with 54%. The WP has 46% in that sample count. Thoughts from our panelists?
Did you expect a tighter race?
Still within margin of error,
With the
right?
margin of error, so
Yes.
So it's
who
anyone's
knows?
guess.
Yeah. I think it might be tighter in the end.
Yeah.
Where the coin flips, I do not know. It's hard at this point.
Did you expect?
But I think this type of a race
Yeah.
is expected.
Yeah. I think this is the one GRC that even if the sample count comes out, people will still wait for the final result before they actually celebrate.
Or commiserate?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. So, actually, I'm so curious as to how the different assemblies, whether it's PAP or WP, how they're all reacting to this. I just want to know what's up with the atmosphere over there.
If we get those visuals, we will definitely cross over to those stadiums, right? There are 5 assembly stadiums at the moment. We have 3 stadiums accommodating supporters from the PAP and 1 Serangoon Stadium. WP supporters will be gathered there, as well as the SDP supporters will be gathered at the MOE Evans Stadium. Okay, so anything else to say about Punggol? Too soon to say, basically.
Marymount also lah.
Yeah, we should talk about Marymount. Let's not leave them out. So just to recap, the PAP is leading there with 71% of the sample count vote. There is Gan Xiao Huang.
Yeah, that's a big jump compared to 2020.
We were talking about it.
Exactly.
We were just doing a little chat before the show.
Yeah, and I think, I had mentioned before that, actually Marymount was one of the lower performing SMCs for the 2020 elections.
55.4?
Yeah, that was
0.04, I should say.
And I think that was also with a she was running against PSP at the time with a fairly new face, no, sorry, I take that back. PSP had fielded, I think, Ang Yong Guan at the time, who had been a candidate before at prior elections. And this time around, again, another PSP candidate, newer to the SMC, I would say, but not an unfamiliar face altogether as well. So I think this is a little bit surprising and that they had only gotten 29% and didn't improve on their vote share from the previous elections.
Okay, I understand we have the sample count for Tanjong Pagar GRC.
Wow, that's a fantastic result for the PAP.
Sample count. All right, but it is a good number to see at this time of the night. 81% to the PAP's team led by Education Minister Chan Soon Seng. They lead 81% to 19%. Okay, we have Ang Mo Kio next. SMLE's constituency. Here we go. All right, 79%. To PPP's 10% and SUP's 11%. Okay, the GRCs are coming in. Ang Mo Kio was the last one back in 2020, but here we go. From Ang Mo Kio, we jump to Bishan Tua Payoh. That one, 75%. PAP leading 75% to SPP's 25%. Big constituencies to cover. Shall we start with
Assembly.
Assemblies? Okay.
How about we start there?
I mean, certainly not a surprise. As I mentioned, it also depends on the competitors they have there. I think a lot of us are still holding our breath for Tampines GRC, for example. But yeah, I think this result is quite reflective. Also, all these numbers are really quite high, and I think that people are responding quite well to Mr. Lawrence Wong's basically, call for support, right? And I think that we are seeing it that in a lot of these hot contest GRCs here.
Right.
Yeah.
So we mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, so SM Lee and his team back in 2020, they won the GRC, Ang Mo Kio GRC, 71.91% against a Reform Party, and the vote share this time around is just quite.
Maybe being a prime minister means you sometimes get a higher penalty if people are upset with the party. I don't know if that's the proof. He's like no longer prime minister. He's not held responsible for the failings of the party as much.
Right, and also I guess maybe the opposition. I think we were discussing this earlier. The opposition parties weren't as established. As back in 2020. Yeah. Okay, so the other one that we saw was Bishan Tua Payoh. That one I think was rather quiet, right? No big shakes over in that constituency.
Except the concern with Ng Hin Hin retiring after being there for quite a lot of years.
This is the first time Mr. Chee Hong Tat is helming a GRC after Defence Minister.
But he's not an unfamiliar face. I mean, Chee Hong Tat has been with the Bishan Tua Payoh GRC for a number of years now, was originally fielded there to begin with. But I think it's surprising that SPP did not do better, considering that Steve Chia has been there as well for a significant amount of time. And I think in the previous elections, well, Bishan Toa Payoh was won by PAP with fairly decent numbers. I don't think the margin or the disparity was quite this much.
Not to mention Chee Hong, that's the transport minister, right?
Exactly.
And everybody's like,
it's a poison chalice, right?
Everybody's like, it's a cursed position, right?
Exactly. So, like what, building on what Rebecca said, so I guess, the many train breakdowns. Okay, we gotta revisit that because Sengkang GRC sample count is in. We have the WP foursome there, the Sengkang 4, right? They call themselves, leading 56%. To the PAP's team, the foursome over there, 44%. Right to Holland Bukit Timah GRC.
Well, the PAP is leading there with 80% up against the RD,
reactions
which has
are cracking me up.
20% there. Now we also have Jurong East Bukit Batok GRC, where the PAP is leading with 76% of the sample count. The RDU has 24% of the sample count. All right. We have results.
These are crazy numbers.
Yeah, the
margins are quite
crazy.
insane.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's tight. Holland Bukit Timah used to be SDP.
Yeah.
Right? So we have seen this changing of parties. I think that's made a big difference. So SDP is not, I don't think, did as badly.
Let me see. In GE2020, the PAP won Holland Bukit Timah, you were saying, right? 66.36%.
So it's quite I think it does matter. People do look at the opposition party and say, is it strong enough? And I think SDP was obviously then deemed stronger than RDU if you consider it as a equal fight. Because it's basically the same team in Holland Bukit Timah.
Okay.
Just to recap, there are two GRCs that are hotly contested, has not come in yet, right? Was it Tampines and
is not
West
in?
Coast? Not in yet?
West Coast is not in?
Yeah.
Would you consider East Coast hotly contested? That's
I
not
would say
in
so, yeah.
either. So that's not in either. Okay. So
Okay.
still tender hooks lah, okay? So we're not over, we can see now.
Can I just say that,
Yes, of
for Jurong East and Bukit Batok, I mean, the fact that, I think Grace Fu had big shoes to fill, coming in after Taman stepped down, and the fact that, this was the first time that she herself has led a GRC, and for her to come in with that kind of results, I think, speaks just a lot to, I think, any concerns that people had with, having women ministers anchor any GRCs.
Right, 76% to her there. Okay, so this is a PM sample count result. We have him and his team leading in Marsiling UT GRC, 74% to SDP's 26%.
And then we have Pasir Ris Changi GRC, where the PAP is leading with 67% of the sample count vote. The SDA has 33%. All right. Big surprises there for...
Not really. I mean, Indrani Raja moved over Tanjong Pagar. And so similar story, I suppose, with Grace Fu.
Exactly.
Right, of the shifting a woman MP, senior figure. But once again, also the same story once again of it depends on who the opposition is, right? Which is part of that discussion why Tampines will be interesting. Because then that's where really the tactical voting of voters, when they kind of say who is the important opposition party, right? Who's the small opposition party? Who do I give my vote to? Is another question, yeah.
Right. So since we were talking about ministers Grace Fu and Indrani Raja, so out of the 211 candidates in this election, 52 are women. So this is the highest number of women candidates fielded in Singapore's recent history, which is great. Although they still make up only about 25% of the slate. So, and I believe it was maybe other candidates have spoken about this, but I do remember WP Sylvia Lim saying it's very hard to recruit female candidates. So I guess what are your thoughts about seeing so many women, and to your points earlier, Ministers Grace Fu and Indrani Raja helming their own GRCs?
I think it's always been hard. I think in general, this is true for most democracies. It's the women are always underrepresented in running for elections and then winning elections, of course. So they're two different things, right? Because we also had to see the number of women in parliament, because you can have lots of women on the slate and not many women in parliament. And the additional layer then to think about is thinking about, I talked about the power, right, of being an MP versus being a cabinet minister. And so where Singapore still has to do quite a bit of catching up is representation in cabinet as well, right? So it's one thing to have all women backbenchers, right, or other women who are put in the front bench, and that's the next kind of looking when we want to evaluate where Singapore is when it comes to gender equality. Not just at slates. I mean, that's important. Participation, winning, and finally put into positions of ministries where they can actually make a difference in terms of policy decision making.
All right, Nydia?
Yeah, I think, with only three full ministers that are female in cabinet, I think it's been a long time coming for both Ministers Grace Fu and Indrani to be helming their own GRCs. And I think that previously there was that goal of having 30% of members of parliament be female. And I think that, that was something that I think former Minister Lim Hui Hua had mentioned as a target back in 2009. And it's been,
I gotta
16 years since.
stop right there, Nydia, because Joel, good news. Sample count for West Coast, Jurong West GRC is in. We have Mr. Desmond Lee and his team leading the PSP team, the PSP A team, I should stress, 61% to 39%. Not as tight, definitely not as tight as we saw in 2020. Okay, from a GRC to an SMC.
We have Kebun Baru SMC there. As Ollie said, the PAP is leading with 66% of the sample count vote to PSP's 34%. All right. West Coast.
Just looking at all of these margins, then it feels like Lawrence Wong isn't doing that well in mastering UT in comparison when you see that some of the other constituencies are getting 80% kind of sample counts. I mean, but then it's like 70-something% was like nothing.
I mean, 75 is still really good though.
I know, but still
a lot of
comparison.
A lot of political leaders.
I'm really quite surprised at this West Coast sample count. I mean, a lot of hype was surrounding the PSP, but I guess when I was listening to a lot of feedback from on the ground, a lot of them say that Minister Desmond Lee is such a fantastic minister, whether or not it is in his role as cabinet minister or his role as someone taking care of the constituency. So I think this result shows that it's been it has paid off really for his team. We have yet to discuss Sengkang actually, which is now currently showing that it's being retained by the WP. What do you guys think about that? Like, is their result a good result for the WP?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they increased their margins. So there's a sign once again of what we said with Aljunied, right, which is that the Workers' Party is consolidating, right, and gaining more votes, and that will be seen as both an affirmation of what the Workers' Party has done over the past 5 years, and of course then an indictment then of the PAP team, of course, for not being able to launch as compelling an opposition, ironically, in this case as well.
So just to recap, the lead that WP team have over in Sengkang is 56% to the PAP's 44%. So as you say, an improvement, yes.
Yeah, we'll wait to see. It might be the same because once again, sample counts and the standard deviation. So watchers should remember that.
And I think it begs the question of like whether or not then Lam Pin Min will still stay on in Sengkang, or if this is really like he tried to get it back, it didn't work, and so now he's just gonna retire. But then also, what about these the three newer ones with Theodora, Elmi, and Bernadette? Are they gonna stay in Sengkang and stick it out and see if they can fight again in another 5 years?
To be fair, 44% is also not a horrible result for the PAP, I would say. Especially when they're all kind of like, the three of them are new faces, right? And also not just new faces, but also new to the political scene as well. So I think this is quite a decent showing, especially when going up against, that particular WP team that is so popular with the demographic of Sengkang.
But again, like Theodora and Elmi had been introduced back in 2022, right? So they're not totally new. Lam Pin Min
and then there was those changes that you were talking about.
There were some changes, but definitely not for Theodora and Elmi. And in fact, I would say that Elmi is working very closely with the private sector as well on issues such as online safety. So I think that has also helped to increase his profile. And I think he's also fairly well known in the community as well. So, I think this, all that to say that 44%, I mean, compared to some of the other results that we've seen tonight, 44% is a good one for PAP in Sengkang.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Are there more coming?
Well, not yet, but
I'm on the edge of my
you just want more of it. But let's give Kebun Baru a spotlight as well. Because the PAP has garnered, not garnered yet. Well, they're leading with 66% of the sample count vote there. That's PAP's Henry Quay up against.
So PSP have fielded a new candidate, right? But still contesting, PSP still contesting in this SMC. I mean, no big surprises. Henry Quay, the incumbent has been walking the ground for 5 years. This guy's a new face, even though, and I feel like, unfortunately, he's best known as Hazel Pua's husband. And that's all I know about him, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Across the board, I think we're seeing the PSP not performing as well as we thought they would. Probably need to reposition and rethink some of their messaging and positioning as well. I think a lot of people probably expected them to do better across the board in all the different constituencies that they're contesting in as well. But yeah, I think the sample counts are showing otherwise.
We talk about West Coast?
Yeah. No, but I think also just quickly going back to West Coast, then with that results, right, then what are the chances of Leong Man Wai and Hazel Pua coming back as NCMPs?
No.
That's definitely not happening.
We have that. No.
Yeah.
Their margin definitely won't qualify them as NCMPs.
So then they won't have that track record.
Right. And if, let's say the results don't change all that much for Aljunied and Sengkang, that means you already have 9 opposition MPs that will be elected into the parliament already, right? So we have 3 more, as you say. So maybe will they be elected from another opposition? We still have East Coast to go. We still have Jalan Kayu to go. So let's wait and see. But yes, I think Nydia, to your point, it doesn't look like Mr. Leong Man Wai and Ms. Hazel Pua will be NCMPs this time around.
I have a question for those sample counts that are coming later. Does that mean that the vote share is closer and tighter? So, for example, we haven't seen Hougang SMC, right? Why is it taking so long?
I don't think so, because, I hope, please, the expert, please interrupt, whatever necessary. But, because judging by what happened in 2020, Ang Mo Kio GRC was the last constituency. The sample count, their sample count came in the latest, and, PM ended up winning that by 71%. And I would think that the sample count was similar. So I don't think that really.
It's tied to how fast people count 100 votes. Okay. No pressure on them.
I'm just a little NC right now. They're all coming in so quickly.
How long it took to take the boxes to the counting center, open it, count 50, everything. So
we've had a slew of.
Exactly.
I think we've had about.
When they came in, they came in fast.
So our producer is telling us that we have 7 constituencies to go.
Okay.
So we've gotten through quite a bit.
Oh, wow.
We've raced through quite a bit.
That came in fast and furious.
We can look at the numbers.
Let's have a look.
So all this concern about the PAP not, returning.
Yes. So how's the mathematics, guys? 62 plus 9 is 71, right? 71.
They're close to 2/3 already. They haven't reached 2/3 yet.
They formed the government.
Will be 2/3.
Not yet. The results, final results.
Yes.
But just, I guess, for back 97 parliamentary seats up for grabs, simple majority means 49 seats. 2/3 would be 65? 65 seats and having 2/3 of a majority in parliament means, you can amend the constitution. All right. So I guess, the history lesson, before parliament was dissolved, there were 96 MPs, 87 before the election was called, 87 elected MPs, 2 NCMPs, Mr. Leong Man Wai and Ms. Hazel Pua from PSP, and 7 NMPs. So we're definitely gonna bust those numbers this time around. All right, so let's see what else. So we are expecting 7 constituencies, the sample results for 7 constituencies to come in. You can see from the rainbow bar that you can see at the bottom of your screen, we have the PAP leading by 62 seats. Of course, those are based on the sample count, but 5 are confirmed, as I keep saying, from the Marine Parade Brattle Heights walkover that we saw back on nomination day. And then the WP has 9 seats to their name, leading at the moment. Okay, so
shall we talk about Punggol?
We should talk about Punggol because
it was a hot
boiling.
GRC. Yeah,
that's what I will.
Boiling.
Associate Editor Zakir Hussain says, I know he's watching and listening right now. Hello, Zak. So I know you say boiling GRC. So come, let's talk about Punggol again. I mean, as you say, margin of error. I guess we're back to reading the tea leaves at this point.
At this point, the close ones.
you
You should have
think-
like a section on the rainbow thing of like unclear. It's like,
Yeah, what do you make of this result, just to recap?
I mean, I know that a lot of attention was put on DPM Gan this campaign period, but I actually also think that Ms. Yun Jeling really had a lot of a pull, you know, in terms of getting people over to the PAP side, where you know, it's I think her track record really has resonated with the people.
From when she was helming the SMC before?
Yes. And you know, whether it's, you know, in her role as an MP or her role in the cabinet, I think whoever has worked with her, and this is feedback on the ground that I've gotten, all positive really, and people really enjoy her as a person, right? And when you look at the comments on the speeches that she has made, they really did resonate. So I do think that more credit has to be given to her as well for being the heart carry, as we say on social media, for the team.
And I think she did posted something during the hustings, right, of the number of house visits or block visits that she did.
Yes.
Maybe some people,
right?
some people didn't view it like, some people saw it as a bit of a weird move for her, a bit of a boastful move, but you know, the numbers speak for themselves. She has been very active on the ground over in Punggol.
I don't think it's boastful at all. I think it's her showing her receipts, right? Because that's what we want to see. A lot of, sorry for using a Gen Z lingo.
I would never, I didn't think I would hear show receipts on this show.
So
But yeah.
at the end of the day, when the campaign first started, there was a lot of online conversation about we don't really want to hear your sob story, you know, upbringing. You know, a lot of people say we want to see your track record. We want you to bring the receipts. Show us what you've done. Show us what you've done in the last 5 years. And I think that's one good example of whether or not you've done your job as an MP, right? And I think rather than seeing it as something that's, you know, like, oh, boastful, like I did this much, I think it's more so like, good. Like, you know, I want to see your track record and what you've done. And like, for me, when I saw that post, I was like, okay, you walk the talk lah. Yeah.
I think the other thing as well is that SMCs, you know, it's very clear who you're holding accountable, right? And that's the I mean, it's both a boon and a bane depending on whether you can show your receipts or not, right? So, you know, you are held personally accountable for your, you know, how well you serve a constituency because you are the face, right? So, you know, it counts against you. Whereas in a GRC system, right, if you have one good performing member, it's like a good project, right? We've talked about this, like that's the analogy everybody uses, right? It's a good project on a GRC. It's hard to hold people accountable, right? So if I like, for example, you know, DPM Gan and I want to give him credit, right? I want to vote in his favour. But I'm also therefore giving credit to all the other members, right? Or if I don't think DPM Gan has done a good job, do I penalise all the others as well? Whereas in an SMC, I mean, obviously now, you know, Sun Xuelin is not competing in an SMC, but she might get some of that credit because her SMC was incorporated, right? So that goodwill continues. She isn't being parachuted. That's the other thing that's important. Even though her SMC dissolved, or while it was incorporated, she was not parachuted out, and therefore lost that
Punggol
goodwill.
makes sense.
Exactly. So I think that was a strategic move by the PAP, right? To say, you know, let's not move her around because she is still, you know, relatively junior, right? Compared to say the other women like, you know, Grace Fu and Indrani Raja. And so, you know, she has built up this goodwill in the location, and that location has been now incorporated into Punggol. And I think that matters as well because she's gained that goodwill and she gets rewarded for it. I mean, I think that's good that you do get rewarded for it, but it's also a function of the differences that we have between GRCs and SMCs, that it's much harder to kind of think about how we hold individuals accountable in a GRC because we aren't making decisions based upon an individual performance. We're basing it upon a team performance, and then we know everybody's worked in teams. Sometimes you get free riders. Some people you appear more, some people don't. Some people, you know, don't do it when they do appear, don't necessarily do a great job of it, and somebody else has to pick up the slack. So there's a lot of other things that go on that complicate the GRC system of holding individuals accountable for how well, for example, they represent the constituents in Parliament and things like that, right? And that's something I think that's
but I also worry that, you know, with the results for Punggol, that, you know, it's also could be interpreted as a affirmation that the PAP strategy of parachuting DPM Gan has worked, and that this fear-mongering of this, you know, we cannot lose this one important man that is so needed in my cabinet, that is a strategy that now is somewhat proven to have worked by virtue of the hard work of some of the other folks in his team. And so then, is this also going to be a trend in future tight races where the PAP will just parachute in a big shot in and say, we cannot afford to lose this person, therefore you have to vote for this person, and therefore, this, because clearly it's worked in Punggol, it had worked somewhat in East Coast, 5 years ago. So, is this then going to be a trend going forward?
All right.
But this time around...
Just to stop you there, we have more results coming in. We've got the sample count results from Nisun GRC. The PAP there is leading with 74% of the sample count. The RDU has 26%. We also have the Jalan Kayu SMC.
Yeah, one of the hot ones that we've been discussing.
Now, this is a close one because the PAP has 52%
Wow.
of, they are leading with 52% of the sample count vote. The
Very,
WP
very
has 48%. And also we have Sengkang GRC. The PAP there is leading with 67%. And then the SDP has 31% and NSP has 2%.
That is
the lowest, I think.
Because the NSP has been working
because I'm sorry, I'm a bit surprised by the NSP number because that was, they are the regular opposition in Sembawang. All right, so this, we were talking about this earlier that, Minister K. Shanmugam has 4 new faces to guide, but it's all right. They're doing right. And even the loss of Louis Ng, who is such a beloved
He really was.
person in Parliament, right?
Absolutely.
The loss of him in this slate doesn't seem to be hurting the PAP team at all. As Natasha said, they are leading, and as you can see, 74% to RDU's 26%, who is led by their Sekjen, Ravi Philemon. So,
Shall we talk about Jalan Kayu first?
Okay, we
Because
have to talk about Jalan
the
Kayu.
hot SMC that we brought up earlier. Thoughts from the
Staying up tonight, then nobody's going to sleep. So
Yeah.
I'm going to sleep after this.
because this one is there's a margin of error in play here, correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Thoughts about the percentage that, the sample count result that
and all the
Ang Chee Meng-
controversies and all
Yes.
the backlash that Mr. Ng Chee Meng has been facing. And of course, not to say that Andre Loh hasn't also been under fire for those leaked messages. Do you think that is there a factor in this very tight race that we're seeing in Jalan Kayu?
For a former minister, who has had so much visibility and still, of course, with NTUC as well, going up against, relative newcomer here, I think says quite a bit. But I do think that he can, breathe a sigh of relief for now, because it's still within the margin of error. Because at least it seemed online that there was significant momentum for Mr. Andre Loh, at least on the last couple of days. Yeah.
How much did SM Lee came out to plug for Ang Chee Meng,
Yes.
and how much do you think that helped?
It certainly helped. I think visibility-wise, when you have SM Lee put his word to anything, people will pick it up, people will listen. I think those are two very important factors there. Yeah.
I guess since we have seen such big leading margins from the PAP, as you can see right now, they are in the lead with 73 seats based on the sample count, and the walkover with WP having 9 seats to their name so far. So, we've talked about the PAP's huge lead at the moment. So, and we talked about more senior, more established candidates like Sun Xueling, Indrani Raja, Shanmugam, DPM Gun, of course. But what is the ideal candidate, do you think, to the average voter? Because talking about Sun Xueling, those receipts, right? So at the very least, they have to be involved and engaged in the area that they're supposed to be working for. And aside from that very basic criteria, what else do you think
the
makes the
easiest way
ideal
to tell
candidate?
actually is look at independent candidates because they're not tied to parties, which complicates the metric, right? Because we don't know if voters are saying, I'm voting for somebody because of their party affiliation or because of who they are. And the independent candidates, because we know they can't pass their policies, right? Because there'll be an independent candidate, right? And so it's probably the easiest metric to be like, what are voters looking for? And the fact that they've done quite well suggests that there are some things. Firstly, I think is Darrell Loh, I think, came off as authentic and working very hard. I mean, both did, I think, certainly, right? And have the efforts to wanting to serve the people because they don't gain anything from it, really, right? With parties, there's a potential you could gain more power, right? You could sit in higher positions within your party. It's a way of kind of climbing up a hierarchy of an institution. Independents don't have that, right? And they're obviously willing to put their money, literally place a bet on whether they're going to win or not. They bought back their deposits, which suggests that people like the fact that, they've taken that chance to, engage in this act of service because there's no political ego really here. They don't gain anything from being an independent. I think that's one thing, certainly. Thoughts or other things?
I think, especially online, it boils down to a couple of factors. The first one being perceived competence, whether or not you're able to, carry yourself and carry out the tasks that you'll be, given as an MP, right? So that's one. The other one is the ability to maybe connect with the people you represent, whether or not people see you as sincere, as genuine. Like a lot of the key messages that candidates have been pushing out this election has been, I will listen to you, I will speak for you, right? So whether they all say that, but I think what really matters here is how they say it and whether or not people believe that they will really be that person for them. The third one, I think, is ability to communicate their stances on policies. Because I think for the first two, Jeremy Tan has done very, very well. But when it comes to, as I said, his association to Bitcoin, for example, a lot of people then said, I don't think I'm quite ready for that, or I don't think I want that to be in Parliament, for example. So I do see, policy stances playing a factor here as well. And at least, with the online younger demographic, these are the factors in which they put weight on. And I think the last one, sorry, I missed out one, is character. Whether or not they see you as someone who is fundamentally a good person and a humble person, a genuine person, a sincere person that wants to serve the people. I think that matters as well for a lot of voters.
I'm curious if whether or not you see any of the PAP's new candidates exhibiting these characteristics that you mentioned, because I don't particularly feel very excited with this new batch of candidates.
Okay.
And I also note that, WP had mentioned how they had engaged commercial parties to kind of determine who they would feel and where they would feel them as well. And I also wonder whether or not that commercial aspect or having the professionals do it might have provided better results for WP. Although at this point, it's really a bit hard to say, but okay.
So I wanted to ask which candidate stood out for you, each of you individually, in this whole campaigning?
Okay, maybe I can answer that question first, which is which PAP new faces have exhibited that. I think two names come to mind. One would be Nisun GRC's Go Han Yen. Yes. So she has done a lot of media appearances this election period. She was on a podcast live stream that I just happened to be on as well. And she then came onto my podcast to do an interview with me. And I felt like in her showing, she demonstrated her competency in her professional background. And in her personal capacity, I thought she was very sincere and she answered questions very intelligently, composed, and also was able to communicate her ideas quite clearly to me. So when I look at online comments, which sometimes isn't too forgiving on the PAP candidates, especially new faces, I think most of them actually are quite positive towards her. So I felt like, she has done quite a good job on that end. The other person, I think I brought her up earlier in the show, is Miss Haslina. I think she, in her various social media videos, for example, and also media appearances, podcast appearances, has come across very genuine, and she has the goods to back it up. She has done a lot of public service work as well, and I think that on that end, she has both the receipts and also the ability to be likable. For our listeners, by the way, for those of you who don't really know what receipts really stand for, it's really just evidence of what you've done. So that's why we online.
Gets it.
No, I don't know if everyone.
Us aunties get it.
Yeah, not
Hey, aunties.
Please, auntie understands.
Okay.
Auntie understands. I think maybe our viewers understand. But yes,
Just
these
don't
are
leave anyone out.
evidence.
Moment of
These are
tension on the
evidence.
show. Well, I have to talk about Hasina because during her Fullerton rally, she did drop some, slang, right? She said, no cap, facts, which...
Besties.
Yeah, besties, which may not have resonated. So what do you make of that, Joel?
I mean, she spoke like that as well on my podcast. So at least there's consistency. But I think, for the most part, she's able to code switch. We can see her put on that more proper, more formal tone. And then, of course, she can then be more candid as well.
Newscaster, right?
She used to be, yeah.
Help lah.
I
mean, they probably can speak more to it than we can. The ability to code switch.
All right.
But yes.
Cannot lah.
Nydia, candidate that stood out for you this election?
I mean, that's why I had posed that question to Joel, because I don't think that any one particular candidate really stood out for me. And I think, in the past, when you had seen in previous elections, there were like your big star candidates, right? Like in 2001 or during that time, there was like the Super 7 or the, when Taman and Vivian all came out at that time. This time around, like there were some big names, I guess, or like senior civil servants that had stepped down to run, like for instance, PS Jeffrey Xiao, and then you have your various military men as well. But like, as you can see, I'm just saying military men because I'm like, what are their names, right? Like some of none of them are really sticking out to me. And so that makes me wonder whether or not, the tried and tested method of for PAP in terms of getting candidates is whether or not that's really has to shift, and they need to look at newer places. Like for instance, Han Yen is a civil servant, but not that senior in that sense. Like she wasn't a permanent secretary or a deputy secretary like Jasmine Lau, but director in the National AI Office. But so maybe are we looking at a younger generation, a smaller pool of people, or how are we looking at? Are we looking at more of the grassroots or like the non-profits, right? With, for instance, I think one of the surprising candidates, a bit more surprising, was the Bishan Toa Payoh candidate, Tsai Ing-tou, who's from the non-profit space as well, right? So I think I think his name came up as a bit of a surprise because no one thought that he was going to be running. But then there's also a lot of names that had been posed as potentially running, but subsequently didn't end up making the cut either.
Yes.
And so like those are definitely names that I know I'd be watching to see if they come up in future.
You're absolutely right in the sense that when I said those two names, I meant among the PAP candidates. Certainly when we look at the opposition side, I think a lot more.
All right, sorry to cut in there, Joel, but we have the results. Well, we have the sample count results for Hougang, and the WP is leading with 63% of the sample count votes. The PAP has 37%.
Definitely a WP stronghold there, still hanging in there. All right, next on Jalan Besar GRC, Josephine Teo and her team leading the PAR team 75% to 25%.
Right.
All right, we can return to our conversation about the PAP new faces.
I was going to say the opposition new faces.
Oh, okay, moving on to the opposition new faces.
Actually, I think a lot of the opposition parties maybe saw the Jamus Lim effect of 2020 and then, wanted to see who else could be the next Jamus, right? And I think this time around, a few faces obviously came, put forward among the rest of them. I would say early on, Harpreet Singh was one of them already. Michael Thung, I think, came up as one of the...
He did very well during the round table.
Absolutely.
It was very impressive.
There were two rallies that I attended this election just to, get the vibe, because I've not been to one before, and this is the first time in 10 years that we've been to rallies. So I did go to the WP Tampines rally, and I did go to the PAP Punggol rally. And for the WP rally, Michael Thung's speech was so energizing, like the way he spoke, the way he had the conviction of to command that crowd of that size. I thought it was incredibly impressive, and I thought he did really well again on the televised forum as well. So on that end, he definitely stuck out. His speeches certainly made their rounds on social media as well. A lot of quotable quotes from his rally speeches. And on the PSP side, I think Stephanie Tan was definitely a standout for me. Yes, she was on the televised forum, but actually her consistency in being, eloquent in all the various media interviews that she's done, I thought, gained her a lot of goodwill. Maybe didn't translate too much onto the votes as we've seen in the sample count today, but I think, as I said earlier on, the runway for her looks promising in the long run. Yeah. And then for me, the independent candidates, which I've already gone through. But what about
Rebecca, your pick?
I'm biased. I mean, my standout candidate is still Jamus. I think whenever it's like everybody's looking for the new Jamus, I think I'm going to find it quite hard. so what always impresses me is the fact that he can take a policy. He's very policy wonky. I think he's very proud of the fact he's like super geeky, and I'm very pleased. Like which is why like his public his social media, like the way he faces his social media is a very strange thing. Like I look at it, I'm like, how does anybody find it engaging? Like the fact that he still collects all these votes because he doesn't do cutesy things. It's not what gets him, but he writes like super lengthy, like very academic-y stuff. And I mean, I love it, obviously, but I'm biased. So I recognize I'm biased. But like I was watching his rally speech, and I was like, so like unsurprisingly, Harpreet Singh, you would expect him to be very good orator, right? And he does do that. He does like use rhetoric and everything. But one thing that still surprises me about Jamus is the fact that he can take very policy wonky things and a lot of like data and still make it compelling, which is very rare as an academic can't do it very well most of the time anyway. But also on the political stage, it just doesn't normally capture people's imaginations, and yet he's still able to do that. And that still stands. It's still something that I watched last election and still watch, and he still repeats it again this election, and you're still like, how does he pull it off? I don't know. I wish I could do that in my classes, right? Just be like, here's all this academic stuff, and like listen to me and love me. I mean, that'd be great. But I think my students don't find me quite as engaging as Jamus, so one can dream.
Did any of the opposition candidates excite you more?
I think definitely, just listening to Harpreet and Alexis speak, I think that was definitely a bit more exciting, and definitely also, I think Eileen Chong from Workers' Party also stood out for me. But it does seem like there were no losers from the televised forum. It seemed like everyone came off well, including Minister Chee Hong Tat, who got that 75% for his GRC. So I think that, a lot could be said about the learning and the growing that some of the return candidates had to do this time around, but also how more polished the new candidates seem this time too.
Yeah. On the SDP end, I think Mr. Arifin Shah also stood out with his passionate speeches, especially in response to
the Jane Wong's remarks, I guess. Yeah, he came out very strongly, yes. I think he did not like lose any ground. He was very firm where he stood, which is an absolute no, stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah, all right. Did well. I think in the context of discussions about racism, I think he was quite clear of like there's no casual racism, and I think that was very helpful because a lot of the parties were not being. And I think this has been a frustration. I mean, up to this point, there's been a lot of frustration surrounding. There's been racism, but parties have not come out and been quite so, like owned it and taken like responsibility for it. They either make an individual take responsibility for it, so the person who makes the racist remark, whatever. And I thought the SDP actually came out quite well. In terms of saying, we own this. This is our responsibility. Dr. Chee did come out and say the buck stops with me. I mean, he's doing quite well despite the buck stopping with him.
All right, hold that thought, Rebecca, because we have the last two, I believe, the last two constituencies in the sample count. East Coast, Edwin Tong's PAP team leading 59% to the WP team led by Yee Zhenjong from NCP, 41%.
Then we have Tampines GRC.
The one we're waiting for.
Has 53% of the sample count, WP 46%, PPP 1%, and NSP 0%.
Gosh. NSP.
Do we need a moment to digest this?
I mean, it's basically a two-horse race, lah. Yeah. I was expecting NSP to do better because NSP's been working the ground.
In the two GRCs that NSP have been working the ground on for so long, Tampines and Sembawang, they have not done well at all.
So I mean, I think this goes to our question about what happens for these parties in the future, right?
Oh, but what do you attribute it to? How come the dip? They just lost prominence?
If you look at the NSP's social media page, they only started their content really, really late, right? Even in the interviews that I've done throughout this campaign season, like they were the last to come on as well. And I felt like, maybe they just didn't have the runway to connect with the people, even though, as a party, they've been on the grounds for years, but a lot of them are also new faces this time around. I think it's interesting to see that the PPP has managed to, do slightly better than NSP here as well, considering some of the controversial things that have come forward with, Mr. Goh as well. But I think really it just boils down. I mean, there's no bar. There's no bar. But okay, I think ultimately we are looking at obviously a two-horse race here.
absolutely.
And I think it really boils back to what you said earlier on today with the tactical voting, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not, you wanted to vote with a higher chance of a party that could win. I feel like, the WP team has a bigger chance than the other two opposition parties. And I think that's where people, decided that, maybe I empathize and like the NSP, but, my vote could go to the WP.
Imagine if we're talking about, right, the four-horse race situation, right? If it ends up being less than 1% between the PAP and the Workers' Party, who's going to be blamed for it, right? It'll be the other opposition parties.
True.
For taking away the Workers' Party vote, right? And that's the big thing, right? With a lack of opposition coordination, you have this. I mean, we don't know, right? If PPP supporters would have transferred their votes to the Workers' Party, that's entirely hypothetical at this moment. But this is the issue with these four-horse races, right? And I do think that what we are going to see. I mean, NSP has found it very hard over the years to hold on to their candidates. A lot of defections have come up on the NSP over years.
Right. We mentioned two already.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So in his interview with me, Mr. Spencer Ng actually said that they are the training academy
Exactly.
for other politicians.
Exactly. And then they're losing deposits, which means people are not going to come forward because I'm not going to give my money to a party that cannot return it to me. There's no returns on my money. Candidates will not run because nobody wants to come out with 0%, right? Doesn't look nice.
And
For the efforts.
given, I guess, maybe safe to say poor performance, or like really definitely not an improved performance compared with 2020, do you think, what do you see the future of the NSP?
I think this is a real turning point for them, and they have to really, do some reflecting of how they can better differentiate themselves amongst the other opposition parties, but also really take a good hard look at why they end up being, the victim at the expense of the bigger opposition parties that have come in with the WP in Tampines and with SDP in Sembawang. Like, what has worked for SDP in Sembawang? What has worked for WP in Tampines? And why hasn't that worked? Even though they are the ones that have been working the ground. They know the residents. They are the familiar faces, but yet still that wasn't enough. So, like, what else do they then need to do? Is it upping their social media game? Is it, creating a better, more coherent message? How do they move beyond being the training ground to actually being a more memorable party? I mean, even PPP is doing better than them by like that 1%, but PPP, I would say, I don't know necessarily that I would support the PPP based on some of the policy positions that they have put out. So I think it's a real turning point for NSP, I think.
Right. And so if, Tampines is turning out to be a two-horse race, so what do you make of that difference between PAP and the WP in Tampines, 53% to 46%?
Still marginal error. I mean, okay, the margin is fairly large at this point, right? So you would be pushing the margins. That being said, is within the marginal error. And we could end up, as I said, it might be that even if the PAP wins, it might actually be close. And then you get this kind of recriminations going back and forth, which is what part of the discussion about this four-horse race was in the first place, right? Did the Workers' Party have to go in? I mean, it seems to suggest that Tampines did actually want Workers' Party, so they're right. But
But then, so how are we looking now with the rainbow bar? Is it?
It is a two-coloured bar.
Let's have a look at how many seats according to the sample count. So the PAP has 87 seats there, WP has 10, and none for the other parties or any of the independents.
Then who are
there.
the two NCMPs?
I think we'll have to wait for final, for the final result.
Too close.
Too close.
Yeah.
Okay, so all the sample results are in. They have been released by the Elections Department. So based on sample counts, PAP is set to win 29 constituencies, while the WP retains Aljunied, Sengkang and Hokan. Of course, 29. They're set to win 29 constituencies. They already have the one, Marine Parade, Brattle Heights, GRC.
Which they secured in a walkover on nomination day.
That's right.
Well, that's it from us.
Yep, it's where we sign off.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca, Joel, Nydia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, if you are staying up, you can always get the latest from our live blog and interactive page at straitstimes.com. We'll also be putting up live streams of the press conferences from the major parties as the night goes on.
Thank you for your company this evening and have a good night.